Sincere Jaden. America is Atlantis. Sincere Jaden. America is Egypt. America is Atlantis. Sincere Jaden. America is Egypt.
Resurrection of the righteous. We believe in the judgment. We believe this first judgment will take place as God revealed right here in America. The judgment will take place in America. The resurrection will take place in America. The judgment will take place in America. The separation will take place in America. And the destruction will take place in America. Doom will take place in America. Doomsday will take place right here. This is the place the Bible is talking about. When the Bible mentions Babylon, it means America. When the Bible mentions Sodom and Gomorrah, that's America. When the Bible mentions Egypt, that's America. This is Rome. This is Babylon. This is that wicked kingdom that God is going to come and set fighting to in the last day. And you're living in that day right now.
Society, an empire that might somehow satisfy the needs of every man. An ancient legend casts the shadows of one such society that is said to have existed long ago. 2,500 years ago, the Greek philosopher Plato set down a dialogue called the Critias. He recounted the story of an ancient Greek poet and statesman named Solon. Solon had journeyed to Egypt in search of wisdom to help the government of his beloved Greece. The Greeks had been beset with factions and troubles, so Solon took counsel from the priests of the city of Sais. An old priest told him, "O Solon, Solon, you Greeks are never anything but children. There is no old opinion handed down among you, nor any science that is white with age." The old priest then proceeded to tell him the story of the lost city of Atlantis. In the centuries that would follow, scholars and researchers have debated whether Plato's Atlantis was intended to be an account of real history or simply an allegorical myth. Some even suggest that Atlantis was really the antediluvian world, the wicked society destroyed by the wrath of God in the great flood of Noah. In the 20th century, Plato's account was further supported by Masonic philosopher Manly P. Hall. Hall claimed that Atlantis had once been a vast and mighty empire that extended to the whole world, a philosophic commonwealth of nations that one day was destined to be rebuilt. But who would rebuild it? And exactly who was Manly P. Hall?
Manly P. Hall was probably the most highly esteemed occultist and Freemason of the 20th century.
He understood the secrets of the ages long before he ever joined the Masons.
Was really the foremost authority on the occultist side of Freemasonry, the deep, dark side of Freemasonry, the one that most Masons never ascend to.
I can't really think of anybody close to him.
Manly P. Hall was one of the leading people within this whole other world that we talk about.
Hall authored over 200 books and is said to have given some 8,000 lectures on ancient philosophy. He is perhaps most remembered for his contribution to the mysterious Brotherhood of Masonry. Upon his death in 1990, the Scottish Rite Journal, a Masonic publication, noted that he was often called, quote, Masonry's greatest philosopher. Among his teachings was that contained in Masonry and all the secret orders was the ancient wisdom of lost Atlantis. Hall wrote that for more than 3,000 years, secret societies had been laboring to create a background of knowledge necessary to the establishment of an enlightened democracy among the nations of the world. According to Hall, these societies could be traced back to ancient Egypt and had for centuries known of a secret place hidden from the eyes of common men, a place that would one day be revealed. In the 17th century, as settlers were colonizing the New World, Sir Francis Bacon, the leader of secret societies in England, set down his classic work, The New Atlantis. While archaeologists and treasure hunters have searched the globe looking for the lost continent, 400 years ago, Bacon, like many of his contemporaries, believed that Atlantis was America itself.
In the world order, you have a top hierarchy of first-tier rank of dynastic families composed really of the old surviving aristocracies of Europe, the black nobility they're called. They're called the black nobility because they came from the darker strain in the aristocracy of Europe. And the old Viking, blue-eyed, blonde aristocrats, more or less, were pushed into the background, or they intermarried with the black nobility and became contaminated. And this is what you have. Of course, the surviving royal family in Europe today is the royal family in England, and they have been black nobility since the 12th century, when the Este family of Italy married into the British royal family. So the first rank, first tier is the old aristocracies of Europe, plus what they call their Hofjuden, their court Jews, which are the Rothschilds and families of that nature, who are able to raise money for them and keep them functioning. Now, in the second tier of world dynastic families, the world order, you have the families who themselves are enormously rich and powerful, but their duty is to serve as courtiers to the first tier of dynastic families. And people in that category are the Rockefellers, the Harrimans, the Morgans, and so forth. Now you have a third tier of dynastic families who serve the second tier. They're never allowed to approach the real top people in the first tier, but they can only serve through serving the second tier. And these are families like the George Herbert Walker Bush family. George Herbert Walker was president of W.A. Harriman Company, and the Bush family's entire career in banking was to serve the Harriman interests, who in turn served the Rothschilds. So that's why I began to use the term about Bush as a dynastic family in the world order of the third tier. And it was picked up, and I see it popping up everywhere. They say, George Bush is a third tier family. They don't even know what they're talking about. They don't explain it because they don't know how to explain it. But that's...
Is Trump a racist?
I don't think so. I've talked to a number of black entrepreneurs who back in the late 80s and 90s, early 90s, were trying to get financing. They couldn't. Somebody told them to go check with Donald Trump. So they come back and tell me they got a loan from Donald Trump. He gave them a term loan. Show up with the interest and the principal, one check. But they had to go see him personally. They independently relate this tale that when they saw him, he said, "This what you supposed to pay me? This our agreement?" I said, "Yeah." And then tore the check up, shook their hands, and congratulations. Now run your business.
And this was when?
This was back in the 90s. See, most people don't even know this. He had a sister. He was, every time you saw him back in the 90s, fine paper bag, brown, beautiful black model. He likes fine women. He didn't have any problem with dating a black woman, walking her down red carpets. So, I mean, she says he's not a racist. He just doesn't like many people, black or white. And he appreciates people who do stuff within their lane. Well, not stay in their lane, but where they choose to be. If they do it well, he admires them. Black, white, brown, red, yellow. Most people don't know this. He was the finance man behind Jesse Jackson's 2 runs for president.
Wow.
So, you know, he talks, but I don't mind somebody talking. I think we've gotten too sensitive to that. That's part of the effeminization of the country. I remember in junior high and high school, hey man, I won't say nothing, man, but last night when I saw your mama, man, you don't know I was over there because you was asleep, man. But blah, 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 blah. We ran the dozens. That was our sport. Mm-hmm. So we were used to talking about each other. Now, man, he talking about my mama, man. What's wrong with you?
Mm-hmm. Do you think Trump will get reelected?
I think he's going to get reelected. this impeachment mess we've got right now. There's a thing called U.S. Constitution, and the Constitution says the president is the chief diplomatic officer of the United States. It puts no limits on his discretion. It simply says that if he comes up with any treaties, they have to be ratified by the Senate. If a treaty is ratified by the Senate, it becomes part of the supreme law of the land. The president and other elected and appointed officials are under oath required to follow the law of the land. The State Department, Secretary of State are part of his cabinet and are essentially advisors to the president. He's the boss. So what he does relative to Biden is simply what is allowed and mandated by the Constitution, specifically Article 1, Section 8, that says the president is charged with, quote, enforcing the law of nations. We have an Interpol treaty with various European states, and also one specifically with the Ukraine that requires that we basically investigate, apprehend, prosecute, extradite criminal elements and criminality. So Biden, out of his own mouth, and I've heard this tape twice, January this year, he says, well, 2019, he says, I guess I broke some laws, extortion. I told the Ukrainians if they didn't get rid of this,
the
prosecutor's name is Skola,
the anti-corruption prosecutor.
Yeah, he said if you don't get rid of him, we'd withhold $85 billion in loan guarantees. So his son, who had just been discharged for the military for being a junkie, had a drug problem, had no history in business. He affiliates with this, and at the time, Biden was in charge of the U.S.'s Ukrainian posture and relations. Obama had assigned him that. And by implication, he brought Obama into committing a crime in office, which is a felony. It's extortion. He committed one, extortion, by out of his own mouth, threatening to withhold $85 billion in loan guarantees if they didn't get rid of this prosecutor, who was zeroing in on that corporation that his son had just been hired to represent after Biden Sr. had been assigned by the president the task of dealing with Ukrainian diplomacy. So son gets $18.5 million out of it, and he has no background other than a dishonorable discharge from the armed services for drug abuse.
But one last question. Do you think black people are missing an opportunity with Trump?
Oh, yeah. See, you've got somebody that is not a lifetime Republican. He's been a blue dog Democrat for most of his life. He usurped the Republican Party. So I think this thing I've been tweeting about, no benefit, no vote, ought to be the deal. We haven't gotten a damn thing out of the Democratic Party for a long time. And the last one, number 44, and the one before that, 43, Bush and Obama, well, there are pictures of Bush with his arm around 8-year-old Barack Obama because his stepdaddy, adopted daddy, Lolo Sotoro, had done a lifetime worth of business with the Bushes.
Wow.
Uncle George Herbert Walker, after whom George Herbert Walker Bush, Bush 1 president, was named, founded Halliburton in 1946 in Oklahoma. And Lolo Sotoro had been international executive vice president for Standard Oil.
There was talk of him being a CIA asset.
Well, yeah, see, he ran the death squads for the Indonesian army. On his own call, anyone could be assassinated. So when George Herbert Walker Bush became head of the CIA under the Ford administration, he just got with his old buddy in the oil business, Lolo Sotoro, and pulled off the hits. See, Barack's grandmother has been acknowledged as being the woman that operated the channels through which CIA money went to the Southwest Pacific. So she introduced her daughter, who had just had Barry, Barack, to Lolo Sotoro, and they got married, and Lolo Soetoro adopted Barack Obama. The name was changed to Barry Soetoro. Now, when he went to high school in Hawaii, I know about that high school. I almost sent my oldest son to it. I could afford it, but I didn't think he deserved it. 20 years ago, the tuition was $95,000 a year, not including room and board. When Obama went there, I've talked to two of his classmates. They independently state that the tuition, not including room and board, was $45,000. Now, Business Insider reports his income for 2017 at over $200 million net. That's after taxes, deductions, write-offs. For this last year, 2018, they reported it as $570+ million. And that's after all deductions, tax, right? Trump doesn't make that net. I mean, even some of the richest people in America don't make that. Why? Because when his stepdaddy died, he was one of the 10, 15 richest men on earth. And he left everything in a trust fund operated out of Indonesia, so the American government can't touch it. That makes Barack Obama 1/3 beneficiary for the assets of one of the 10, 15 richest men on earth. See, so we got a game run on us. So, you know that little thing that Bush W does when he gets with Michelle, they giggle and he gives her candy. The inside thing, is that supposed to be the same kind of candy he used to give to her husband when he was 6, 7, 8 years old?
So in talking about Brother Huey Newton tonight, we have to talk about the struggle of black people, not only in the United States, but in the world today, and how he becomes part and parcel of that struggle, how we move on so that our people will survive America. Now, why is it necessary for us to talk about the survival of our people? Many of us feel, many of our generation feel, that they're getting ready to commit genocide against us. Now, many people say that's a horrible thing to say about anybody. But if it is a horrible thing to say, then we should do as Brother Malcolm says, we should examine history. The birth of this nation was conceived in the genocide of the red man. Genocide of the red man.
This is what happened, you know. This is 1854. The American Indian chief of Seattle replies to an offer from the white government of the United States to buy, in quotation, to buy a large area of Indian land. How can you buy or sell the sky, the warmth of the land? The idea is strange to us. If you do not own the freshness of the air and the sparkle of the water, how can you buy them? You don't own them. Every part of this earth is sacred to my people. Every shining pine needle, every sandy shore, every mist in the dark woods, every humming insect is holy in the memory and experience of my people. This beautiful earth is the mother of the red man. We are part of the earth and it is part of us. The rivers are our brothers. We give the rivers the kindness we would give to any brother. But the white man does not understand our ways. He is a stranger who takes from the land whatever he needs. The earth is not his brother but his enemy, and when he has conquered it, he moves on. He kidnaps the earth from his children and he does not care. I do not know. Our ways are different from your ways.
Now, do you wish like you had a third term? And I used to say, you know what, if I could make an arrangement where I had a stand-in, a front man or front woman, and they had an earpiece in, and I was just in my basement in my sweats looking through the stuff, and then I could sort of deliver the lines, but somebody else was doing all the talking and ceremony. Wow. I'd be fine with that.
What if we were to tell you that American presidents aren't chosen by ballot, but instead by blood? That's right, the candidate with the bluest blood has won the race for president every time. 33 U.S. presidents are descendants of Emperor Charlemagne.
What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up?
What's up? And it doesn't stop there. These guys aren't just related to royalty, they're related to each other.
I know many are concerned between the balance.
Clinton's related to Ford, Bush is related to Cheney, and guess who Cheney's related to? That's right, Barack Obama. Bullshit? Or bull not shit?
That's the bottom line. You got any advice, first of all, for these young guys?
Now, Mitt Romney and Mike Huckabee are 10th cousins once removed, also known as kissing cousins. And Rudy Giuliani? Well, he's just related to the mob.
Holy shit.
What about Hillary? Well, she's 10th cousins with Madonna and 9th cousins with Angelina Jolie.
I did not have sexual relations with that one.
Were I a Jew, I would be a Zionist. And my father pointed out to me, I did not need to be a Jew to be a Zionist. For I am. Israel is essential to the security of Jews worldwide.
Unique and, how can I say it? So strong with Jews worldwide. There is a, I mean, you know, I used to say early on when I was a kid, I'd say, when I was a young senator, I'd say, if I were a Jew, I'd be a Zionist. I am a Zionist. You don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist.
And the digital dollar. President Biden is moving closer to taking control of our monetary system, pushing us to a digital dollar. It's something we've been warning about for 2 years on this show, and on the face of it, it may sound convenient, right? That's how they're going to couch it to you, that it's convenience. That don't worry about cash. Don't worry about those coins that rattle around in your purse, because now you'll just have one simple ID that you can use on any smartphone, scan it, move it, doesn't matter, bus stop, train station, your Amazon deliveries, whatever you want. It's all in a digital ID. It's all right there, and we'll use this digital dollar. You won't use Bitcoin because we don't want to let you use Bitcoin. You'll use the American Federal Reserve built digital dollar. In March of 2022, President Biden took the biggest steps yet to sign an executive order, again, one of these executive orders, requiring the Federal Reserve to research, experiment, and evaluate the risks and benefits of a digital dollar. So Tom Emmer, House Majority Whip Congressman Tom Emmer this week, just introduced a brand new bill to stop Biden from moving to a digital dollar by using executive emergency powers. It's called the CBDC Anti-Surveillance Act to ban unelected bureaucrats in D.C. from issuing a central bank digital currency in the United States. That's what CBDC stands for. So Emmer, Congressman Emmer, says the White House is about to introduce an authoritarian style and surveillance style digital dollar through, again, executive orders. Watch.
Last week, I introduced the Central Bank Digital Currency Anti-Surveillance State Act to halt the efforts of unelected bureaucrats here in Washington, D.C. from stripping Americans of their right to financial privacy. Digital assets in the digital economy are the future, but the Federal Reserve should play no role in developing a central bank digital currency, or otherwise known as a CBDC. The consequences, if we get it wrong, are far too serious. The Biden administration is currently itching to create a digital authoritarian-styled surveillance-style digital dollar. And through an executive order, they are pursuing analysis on a retail CBDC that would not be open, permissionless, or private.
So,
I mean, you would think this would be bipartisan. This is something that AOC can get out there and really champion in her fancy tax the rich type clothes.
You mean the anti-digital dollar?
Yeah,
or pro-digital?
you would think that this would be, that this would be bipartisan.
You would think.
That nobody wants a centralized banking system that will give more power to central government.
Where's Elizabeth Warren on this?
Yeah.
Right?
Bernie Sanders. This is a great cause for them to champion around.
And it is about tracking, right? It's about tracking and it's about total control. And again, this is what Catherine Austin Fitts, the brilliant Catherine Austin Fitts, has been talking about for 2 years, 3 years, maybe even longer than that, on this specific issue. Tucker had her on the other night, and I thought that this was really, she nailed the concerns about the CBDC, about the digital currency, and why we should all be focused on this. Watch.
So, Tucker, the one of the bedrocks of freedom is freedom to do financial transactions, including privately, or freedom to do where you want to do and wherever you want to do. And unfortunately, as the financial system has become more and more digital, you see more and more not only invasive surveillance, but more and more controls. You referred to Canada, perfect example. And the reality, as the financial system gets more controlling and more invasive, it's a little bit like bringing up a corral around us. And CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, and vaccine passports or digital IDs are sort of the last shutting of the gate. It's hard for many people to imagine the risks here because we're so used to living with financial transaction freedom, and we don't understand that when this gate closes on us, we literally will be sitting in a system where the central banks believe that our assets belong to them, and they can dictate where we can spend money and what we can spend money on. The important thing to understand is central bank digital currencies are not currencies. It gives the ability for the central bankers, and they've said this publicly, the ability when this gate closes on us, we literally will be sitting in a system where the central banks believe that our assets belong to them, and they can dictate where we can spend money and what we can spend money on. The important thing to understand is central bank digital currencies are not currencies. It gives the ability for the central bankers, and they've said this publicly, the ability to not only set the rules centrally, but enforce the rules centrally. If you don't behave, you can have your money turned off.
So again, and I see people in the chat saying cash is king, and that's the thing, right? They were telling us during COVID, oh, don't touch cash because it has COVID on it.
Yes.
Remember that? I mean, this is literally coming, it was coming from the government. Don't touch cash because you might be able to transfer COVID. So it's better just to do everything contactless, move away from cash. Mm-hmm. And I got to say, like, you know, I've been telling you guys on the show, every chance I get is, you know, have cash, get cash, use cash, do as much as you can in that way. And also, of course, making sure that you've got like precious metals as a protection against this, because it's coming. It's coming. And when they start to control us with this digital dollar, that's going to be the way that they're going to tell you your government benefits, your movement, tracking, and climate is going to be tied to all of this, all of it.
I'm going to recommend the book Layered Money by Nick Bhatia, because it's an amazing history of physical currencies and into digital currencies. And there was never any reason for governments to be in control of currencies and make them state-run. And no government has ever showed themselves to be responsible with a national currency. Never. And so to continue to mount power onto these elected officials who then pass it off to unelected officials is insane to me. There's no way that you can slice this and feel good about it from a historical perspective or from a track record perspective.
Well, and we've been showing here on the show a number of different countries that are like, you're seeing runs on the bank right now. Again, getting as much cash as you can on hand on a regular basis, keeping it in a safe, protecting yourself. But I'm telling you, if you try to go and try to get all your money out of the bank, they're going to laugh at you because they don't have it there. They don't. You want to get all your money out, they're not going to have it there.
The thing the Horn of Africa needs is more foreign military bases, more weapons, and more European meddling. What we call our strategic relationship isn't about human flourishing, it's about the EU's ambitions as a superpower. There's now a new great game in the Horn of Africa. Greater and lesser powers are pockmarking the place with military bases. France, the US, China, Germany, Japan, Italy, Saudi Arabia all have a presence in the tiny area of Djibouti alone. Mercenaries are swarming in from all quarters. The entire region is being militarized. War is in the air. And what about the people facing climate and food insecurity? None of this benefits them. We talk about instability, but we only make it worse. We flood the place with weapons, hand over the profits to European arms companies, and charge the bill to our citizens. And then with the carnage, we go back in and we do it all again. It's a racket. Strategic relationship, it's one thing after another, isn't it? Really, it's the same as it ever was. And all I can say is, God save Africa from Europeans offering help.
They haven't yet claimed us. We have some relationship with China, but that's to come, I'm sure, because China and Russia represent to them serious kinds of problems. But also black people represent a serious problem to the United States government and has done so historically. That's why Malcolm X is dead. That's why Martin Luther King is dead. Russians didn't do that. That's why more than 28 members of the Black Panther Party in 1968 alone were murdered. The Russians didn't do that. That's why this community and our people have been under aggression. That's why a spy center is being developed right here in North St. Louis. Even as they're pushing black people out of our homes, gentrifying us and things like that, taking away our properties, created this entity that they call a land bank administration for the purpose of stealing property from black people legally. Even as they're doing that kind of thing, they're attacking those of us who are trying to defend this community and to bring economic development to this community. That's what we do. That's what we do here. That's what we've done historically. So when it comes to this issue about Russia and Ukraine, where Russia has spent, where the United States has, in this last budget offering that I saw, talked about more than $40 billion more that they've given to this entity that they call Ukraine, the entity that they put in power after overthrowing the legitimate government in Ukraine in 2014. We're supposed to have forgotten that, to put themselves closer to the border of Russia, that they have declared to be some kind of adversary, though they haven't explained to us why it's an adversary, though I don't care why they would say that. The fact is that we are able to say that we are not pacifists. We are not pacifists at all. We believe that there's a difference in just wars and unjust wars, and we are opposed to unjust wars, and we support just wars. Unjust wars are those wars that try to colonize people, keep them under tyranny, bury them under oppression, and just wars are those wars that are fought by oppressed people to liberate themselves. We don't just support Russia in this war against Ukraine. We support Palestine. Even as the U.S. government and U.S. citizens are leaving this country every day, going to Palestine, where that is murdering Palestinian Arabs on a daily basis. Don't tell us that we can't have friends that you don't like. Because the fact is, the friends that we have were people who will be opposed to murdering people in Palestine, murdering people in North St. Louis, murdering people in Afghanistan, murdering people in Syria. We would be opposed to them. And so anybody who would stand up for the liberation of those people, we're on their side. You don't have to be a Russian or anything like that. One. Secondly, yes, I have been to Russia, but I've also been to South Africa. I've been to Ghana. I've been to various other places in Africa. I've been to Nicaragua. I've been all kinds of places where oppressed people are organizing, because black people need not to be isolated. And that's what this government would do. They would have us isolated, assuming that there is nothing that we can turn to except Joe Biden, who turned loose 100,000 policemen in the street with his omnibus crime bill that's probably killed Mike Brown. And the Russians didn't kill Mike Brown, by the way. Nobody said a Russian did that. That was an American domestic soldier that they called the police that killed Mike Brown. So you want me to hate Russians? And no, I don't hate Russians, but I hate those people who killed Mike Brown, and I hate the institutions that's responsible for that. So I wanted to say that, and to be clear about that. I'm not unabashedly I'm an unabashedly black man, an African that's committed to the liberation of black people, the African and all the other oppressed peoples on the planet Earth. And the United States has always historically been opposed to the liberation of oppressed people, opposed to freedom in Nicaragua, opposed to freedom in Afghanistan, opposed to freedom in South Africa. Mandela, from your perspective, at one time was a terrorist. Fidel Castro, how many times has the U.S. government tried to murder Fidel Castro? This is the reality that we're talking about, and so we are unabashedly on our own side. So I just want to say that in terms of what happened. Let me just say, they actually sent a drone into this house. They said we were not charged with anything. That's what they said. They handcuffed me and my wife out here. They wanted me to sit on the curb while they were carrying this out, something that I refused to do. They wanted my wife to sit on the curb out here, that she refused to do. Only thing we do is fight for black people, black power. All you got to do is walk through North St. Louis and you can see the changes that we've brought here as a party for black people. And the government is opposed to that, and that's why we are under attack, and also because they see us as pawns that they can use in this propaganda war against Russia. That's why black people who make this mistake of assuming that what's happening in Afghanistan or what's happening in Russia and Ukraine have nothing to do with us. Clearly it does have something to do with us. The United States government clearly says it has something to do with us. And what they have done also is tried to create a situation where there is the appearance that anybody, black people who oppose, who criticize what the United States government is doing to us must be the employ of Russia. Like somehow Russia killed Mike Brown. That somehow we needed the Russians to tell us that we were oppressed. That's a hell of a statement. It's a disgusting, slanderous statement that black people don't have enough sense to know who it is that's killing us, murdering us, and keeping us living in these conditions. And I've been to Russia, and I didn't see Russians living like black people live right here in North St. Louis. That's the reality.
The surge of neo-Nazism and anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe has a strong U.S. tie. The Polish Senate has approved a law that criminalizes the assigning of responsibility to Polish nationals for the crimes of the Nazi Holocaust and for using the term Polish death camp. Poland's far-right government is a close U.S. ally and was openly embraced by President Trump in a visit last July. And meanwhile in Ukraine, it has just been revealed that the U.S. has supplied military assistance to the Azov Battalion, a far-right militia known as a bastion of neo-Nazism within the Ukrainian armed forces. Max Blumenthal is a best-selling author and senior editor of the Gray Zone Project. His recent piece, published by The Real News, is called "The U.S. is Arming and Assisting Neo-Nazis in Ukraine While Congress Debates Prohibition." Welcome, Max. Let's start with what you have reported for The Real News about Ukraine. You call this a truly scandalous episode of close to covert U.S. support for neo-Nazism in Ukraine. Explain what's going on there.
Yeah, the Azov Battalion is essentially a militia that's grown out of the Patriot of Ukraine Party, which was a neo-Nazi white nationalist party founded by a street demagogue named Andrei Beletsky, who has pledged to restore the honor of the white race, in his words, through his national or social national party in the Ukrainian parliament, advanced laws forbidding race mixing, this kind of thing. And the Azov Battalion became active after the civil war began in the Donbass region in eastern Ukraine, when pro-Russian separatists sought to secede, partly because of the neo-Nazi incipiency in Kiev. They didn't want any part of it. They speak Russian. Their language is not going to be recognized by the new government. And so the Azov Battalion was ultimately incorporated into the country's National Guard and military through the Ministry of Interior, through Arsen Avakov, who's been basically a supporter of its agenda all along. He also at one point installed another figure from Patriot of Ukraine, Dmitry Yarosh, as the police commissioner in Kiev. This is another neo-Nazi figure. And, you know, all along we saw these denials, especially in 2014 during the Maidan so-called Revolution of Dignity, which was actually a right-wing nationalist coup against a democratically elected government. We heard liberal voices like Timothy Snyder or neoconservative operatives like Jamie Kirchick deny the very existence of neo-Nazism in the ranks of the Maidan. Now I think it's very clear that Azov is on the march, and I'll get to that in a minute. What I did here at The Real News was compile a series of reports, including from Azov's own website, that demonstrate that U.S. military trainers have visited Azov in the field to train and exchange logistical information. They appeared in uniform with Azov Battalion members who are wearing the Wolf's Angel patch, which is a Nazi SS symbol, a runic neo-Nazi symbol on their arm. This is just a scandalous spectacle. Not only that, contracts have been revealed showing that the Texas-based Airtronic Arms Company has produced PSRL-1 grenade launchers that were actually authorized under the watch of the State Department and delivered directly into the hands of the Azov Battalion. So the U.S. has armed Azov. Azov actually scrubbed photographs from its website that showed them in the field with those very weapons. One reason this is significant is because the Azov Battalion functions in a lot of ways like ISIS has in Syria and Iraq, where it receives foreign fighters. It's received sniper training from a Swedish military veteran, and it received a French farmhand named Georges Monteau. At some point in 2016, Monteau returned from Azov camps in the east with a trove of weapons that was enormous. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of pounds of C4 explosives, automatic weapons, and grenade launchers, and he was on his way to Western Europe to attack a soccer festival and carry out attacks on synagogues and mosques. This would have been one of the most significant terror attacks in recent European history. So it's a scandalous episode. And now we've learned in the last week that the Azov Battalion has formed a national corps, which is both a political party and a street militia that is deployed into the streets of Kiev. A neo-Nazi militia is deployed into Kiev. They're not fighting pro-Russian separatists. They're there to, quote-unquote, restore law and order. And this is part of the wider agenda of the far-right nationalist and neo-Nazi movement in Ukraine. It's called the Reconquista. It's been spelled out by Andrei Beletsky, their chief ideologue. And the idea is to essentially recapture the so-called white countries of Europe, Ukraine being the bastion of the white reconquest of Europe. And so you have hundreds of armed neo-Nazi militia members in Kiev right now. They've actually interrupted a city council meeting. They took over a city council meeting in central Ukraine, and it's beginning to look like a putsch. President Poroshenko is weaker than ever. He's even been denounced by the Kiev Post, which is basically an arm of the pro-NATO Atlantic Council. He's, I don't know why, getting attacked by all of the pro-Maidan Western commentators. And meanwhile, this neo-Nazi putsch is happening completely beneath the radar of U.S. media. And it's absolutely terrifying, not only to the Jewish community of Ukraine, but to average Ukrainians.
You know, Max, in the piece, you quote anti-Nazi activist Ephraim Zurov, who says that Ukraine has more statues for killers of Jews than any other country. I found that chilling. Now, there have been efforts in the U.S. Congress to bar the delivery of weapons to neo-Nazis in Ukraine, but they've been defeated. Is that right?
Well, they haven't been defeated. They've been continually pulled from congressional defense authorization bills, and there is one prohibition that's on the that's been proposed. The House Appropriations Bill contains the language forbidding weapons to Azov, but in the meantime, while Congress dithered, the Trump administration authorized a shipment of tandem anti-tank missiles, extremely advanced anti-tank missiles from Raytheon. The U.S.'s envoy to Ukraine, Kurt Volker, who is connected to Raytheon through various means, which I explained in a separate article at TruthDig, is in favor of this arms shipment, and it's inevitable that it will reach Azov because, as I said, Azov has been absorbed into the national Ukrainian military and are considered some of the best fighters. Another point is that, if you look at the 600 or so Azov National Corps members who deployed to Kiev to restore national order, just the cost of their coats alone would cost over $1.7 million, according to several Ukrainian media sources. So who's paying the bills for them? How are they able to maintain advanced weaponry, such high-level uniforms? All of these questions suggest that they're operating hand in glove with the Ukrainian government, specifically the Interior Ministry of Arsen Avakov.
Let's talk about Poland. You have this law just passed this week by the Polish Senate that criminalizes the criticism, essentially, of Poland's role in the Nazi Holocaust. I was struck by the language from the State Department in response to this. It was very mild. They talked about it jeopardizing strategic relationships, saying that the resulting divisions that may arise among our allies benefits only our rivals. So mild words there from the U.S. towards a very close ally, openly embraced by Donald Trump. Your thoughts on the role of the U.S. in supporting the Polish government, and also one of your areas of focus, which is Israel, which also has developed ties to Poland, although they have criticized this legislation.
Yeah, I mean, first I should mention that Ukraine has enacted very similar legislation forbidding, basically banning any Ukrainian citizen from condemning Nazi collaborators like Stepan Bandera or Roman Shukevich, who've had streets and boulevards and memorials named for them across Ukraine. These are the Jew killers that Efraim Razorov was referring to. In fact, Stepan Bandera Boulevard in Kiev leads to Babi Yar, one of the sites of Jewish slaughter that's remembered in Holocaust history. That's just disgusting to me, and it should be to everyone else. American Jewish organizations have been very silent on this matter. In Poland, the government, the Law and Justice government, this right-wing nationalist government, which received Trump very warmly, Trump gave that speech where he echoed a lot of their language about the clash of civilizations and values, has enacted, a law forbidding Polish citizens, or the Senate has passed a law forbidding Polish citizens from referring to Polish death camps. Essentially, they want to delete the extensive collaboration of Polish citizens, including people who are considered heroes by Polish nationalists today, from the annals of the Holocaust, because they were Nazi collaborators. They were war criminals who were involved in the mass slaughter, the industrial slaughter of Jews. Israeli government has been very upset about this week. Israeli media has been turning to the so-called bubbies, the grandmothers who came to Israel after the Holocaust out of the displaced persons camps. But one of the things that hasn't been really mentioned in Israeli media is the fact that the Israeli government last year signed a memorandum of understanding with the Polish Law and Justice government. And part of that memorandum of understanding was that Israel recognizes Poland's need to ban expressions relating to Polish death camps. Israel just signed on to that. They basically signed on to the legislation that their government is condemning. And, why did they do that? Well, Israel has a long history, and the Zionist movement has a long history of collaborating with anti-Semites, including Nazi Germany, to advance its own narrow national interests. In this case, we recently saw Poland abstain from a UN vote condemning Israel over the Trump and condemning the Trump administration's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And Poland recently signed a $14.5 million deal to import Patriot missiles from Israel that are mostly made by Israeli arms manufacturers. Israel's basically looking to Eastern Europe as the future support base for its own Likud right-wing government. And Israel really has no place to condemn Poland or Ukraine or any other country that engages in banning certain recognitions of the Holocaust, because Israel's government has authorized its own legislation to forbid its Palestinian citizens from observing their own destruction, specifically the Nakba, which represented the organized campaign of ethnic cleansing from 1947 to 1948 and the ongoing campaign of destruction and dispossession of the Palestinian people. So those are really shared values between Israel and the Polish government, and those shared values are reflected in the Memorandum of Understanding.
On that historical point about the history of figures in the Zionist movement, prominent figures collaborating with anti-Semites, there's an episode of the Moderate Rebels podcast hosted by Max Blumenthal and Ben Norton with guests Joseph Mossad on this topic, and we'll link to that on the Real News website on this page. Max Blumenthal, best-selling author, senior editor of the Gray Zone Project,
are now saying, buy a gun if you use the N-word on social media. I kid you not. Let's put up the Twitter leader right now. According to Rolling Stone, Twitter bots are using the encrypted messaging app Telegram to sell guns across the platform against its terms of service. This comes after Elon Musk Twitter takeover, where he announced he'd make cleaning up the bot a top priority. His strategies on that front have produced, at best, mixed results. Moreover, in recent months, some users have been plagued by a type of spam that directly violates Twitter policy. Automated replies from accounts offering guns for sale. Now, let me show you how significant this is. Let's put up messages. The bots seem to be activated by specific keywords, often predominantly curse words, and especially the N-word. Here's an example of some bots and their responses with polls referring to weapons. Okay? Yo, I got cheap, clean poles for sale. Click the link in my bio. Poles means gun. Okay? If you need, utilizing symbols. Click the telly in my bio 247. According to a criminal complaint made by U.S. Postal Inspector Joshua R. Leslie to the Department of Justice District in New Jersey, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service launched an undercover operation on Telegram to uncover drug sales such as heroin, but also found numerous channels for selling firearms. Starting in or around August 2020, USPIS began conducting an undercover operation on the social media platform Telegram. Several channels were identified as selling narcotics, including TMO Drug Menu, and I think this is Ill Fields Drug Menu, which advertised the sale of various types of illegal drugs, including heroin and pills. Law enforcement determined that Angelo Chavez was the administrator of the TMO Drug Menu and used to handle Trap Market Official, and that the Philip Luevano was the administrator of the Fields Drug Menu. It used the handle The Illest. In addition to offering various drugs for sale, Chavez also advertised the sale of firearms on the Trap Market Official Telegram page. There's more. Let's put her up. Some like Lindsay Nickel, policy director of the Giffords Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence, have speculated that bots are being used by law enforcement. Yes, law enforcement to entrap citizens and especially target Black community. Dr. Jen Goldbeck, a professor at the University of Maryland College of Information Studies, had this to say, and I quote, that the way the bots operate is not random at all. She adds that they're clearly programmed to respond to some, probably variations on the N-word in these cases. And though she says the idea that feds are behind the trend is not the worst theory, it doesn't ring true to Goldbeck. I've talked to plenty of FBI guys about this before, and Twitter bots seem beyond their normal set of skills. I do understand your position, Professor, but this is why it would be classified in a specialized department, because the average FBI agent would not be aware of how to do this, nor the programming mechanism that governs it. All right. Let's go to Dr. Liz. All right. However, Dr. Liz Rodwell, an assistant professor of digital media information and logistics technology at the University of Houston, says it's actually easy to produce these Twitter bots. And Dr. Kathleen Carley, a professor with the Institute for Software Research at Carnegie Mellon University, had this to say: there may be multiple motivations to sow dissension, to increase polarization, to encourage racial prejudice. All of these are achieved by these messages. Rolling Stone joined the Telegram channel the bots linked to and uncovered several messages promising sales of mostly semi-automatic Glock pistols for as low as $100, with pictures of U.S. postal documents to confirm past deliveries. The sellers were claiming to have a gun shop in Virginia. The Telegram user advertised owning Beato's Gun Shop, a non-existent gun store, and copied the advertising of a real Bob's Gun Shop, Rolling Stone reached out to the owner, who was already aware of the Telegram user, and says it's totally a fake business and a phishing scam. He himself has been trying to shut it down to no avail. Policy Director Lindsay Nichols also pointed out a nefarious and much larger problem with Telegram. The loophole in federal law that allows unlicensed sellers to sell guns without conducting background check emboldens bad actors. Indeed, even as a phishing scheme, the business relies on buyers believing that they surreptitiously purchase weapons over state lines and the internet or on the internet without getting caught. Nichols says the phenomenon highlights the need for a clear line of identifying when gun seller or a gun seller is required to be licensed, get a license, and conduct background check. So you may be wondering, well, how does this even work as far as interstate travel? The purchase of firearms, obviously a minor could do so under this particular framework. Well, conservatives in particular don't give a damn. They don't care. They will not present legislation to say, okay, we get it, at least this version of gun control is relevant. Anytime you attempt to make a common sense law to stop a disaster from happening as it relates to guns, they scream gun control. But keep this in mind. Yes, you do have the constitutional right to bear arms. You also have the constitutional right, freedom of speech. But that freedom is limited. In other words, you cannot utilize that speech in order to harm someone else. It has a limitation, a penalty, a repercussion. So when we have that restriction on speech, nobody says, well, that's speech control. We know it to be common sense. So why do we utilize the terminology gun control when it's simply a common sense approach to stop others from being harmed? AB, thoughts here?
Yeah, my legal mind clicked in really fast, right? Because it goes to show where we're going to go with litigation when it comes to bots and AI and stuff like that, because we're just giving them so much permission.
Yep.
And allowing them to almost it seemingly be free thinkers on the internet, right? And there's no way to prosecute or control this. So I think that's a big issue that we need to consider. In addition to looking at the target audience in this, right? When you look at the vernacular that is used in these tweets and information, there is a particular target audience. And I think that's one thing we need to be aware of, because whether it means that this young target audience, right, gets a hold of weapons and we have more mass shootings in schools and stuff like that, or it means that we find a way to put more people of color in prison because they are being entrapped, we have an issue on our hands. And so I absolutely agree that we need to be talking about the Second Amendment and putting some limitations on that, so that it's still safe to be a gun holder in this country, without opening up the floodgates to any and everybody and their mama, people who don't need to have guns in their hands, having guns in their hands. So, it's scary on all fronts. And again, from a legal perspective, I'm really interested in how we're going to deal with this in the future.
Yeah. When a disaster happens, I hate to say it that way. I really do. But they won't pay attention to this until something happens that connects back to this dynamic. You have an opportunity to solve it now.
Say that. My wife was here too. I don't know if you want to say anything about what happened. Yeah, I want to hear this. I want you to hear this from different people. And this house was not the only house attacked. They attacked our office in St. Petersburg, Florida, our headquarters there. They raided it. They stole materials from us, just like they stole from this house. They stole my phone. They stole my computer. They stole computers from other members of our organization. Cell phones, they have that. They stole that from us. They said that they had a warrant for it. They may have had a warrant for it, but they didn't show it to me. So all I saw was the thief. The thieves came in and used flashbang grenades to terrorize this entire community and stole some material from us under the color of law. It's a colonial law that we're looking at. Even if they had a legitimate warrant, like they said, all they got to do is knock on the door. What is a flash bomb? What is being out here terrorizing the entire community of something about a search warrant? It had nothing to do with a search warrant. It had to do with this game that they are playing to keep black people oppressed, and this ideological, this propaganda war that they engaged in with Russia. And we're not going to be a part of it, and they're not going to keep us from fighting for our freedom. We got a black community conference that's scheduled for the 31st, for Sunday, 20 21st, the 31st, right here at Legacy. And black people are going to come out and we're going to be free. And there are not enough FBI agents on the planet Earth to stop the struggle of black people. We're going to make that happen. We got a doula event happening right now where we're training 20 black women to be doulas. Because they kill our children, they close our hospitals down, our babies are not able to be born safely, black women are treated badly when they're pregnant, so we are solving that problem. That's what this government is attacking because it doesn't want that to happen. It's not going to stop us. They attacked our center and houses on this.
Uhuru. My name is Akile Anai, and I'm the Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party. I want to appreciate the media for uniting to be a part of this press conference that we're having right now at the St. Petersburg Police Department headquarters, where they just finalized their press conference, which we were not allowed to be a part of. I guess public presence was not allowed to participate in this press conference. Neither were questions from the media. But we're here because we want to explain what this is about, what the FBI, what the police have stated as the basis for, this so-called investigation. We want to clarify several things. One, that what happened this morning when my car and my personal property was seized from my possession, when they attacked Chairman Omali Yeshitela and Deputy Chair Onizane Yeshitela in St. Louis, Missouri, where our current headquarters is for the African People's Socialist Party, the Uhuru Movement, when they broke into their homes and they handcuffed our leadership, when they went into the Uhuru House here in St. Petersburg, Florida, without issuing a search warrant, when they broke down the doors. So we want to say that they are characterizing this as some kind of investigation into our affiliation with, Russian foreign governments and things like that. But one, I think that this exposes the crisis that the U.S. imperialism is in. Because the U.S. and other world colonial powers have been collaborating against Russia for early into the early 1900s. And this is a consequence right now in 2022 that we see the same attack against Russia. And right now, this war with Ukraine, this defensive war in Ukraine that Russia is actually waging against world colonial powers, not Ukraine as a single entity, but the U.S. and all colonial powers who have an interest in colonially dominating African people right here in this country and around the world and extracting resources from the majority of peoples on the planet. That system, this current system, is in severe crisis and they cannot rule in the same old way. So that's what we understand, one, about the U.S. government. And the ruling class itself states that imperialism is on the decline. U.S. power is it's not cyclical, but it is permanent. So that's number one. Number two, the African People's Socialist Party is an organization that has been here for 50 years. It is an international organization that not organizes just here in St. Petersburg, Florida, but right there in St. Louis, Missouri, in Oakland, California, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and all throughout the U.S., in Africa, in Europe. And the history of the African People's Socialist Party is to unite with any forces that unite with the anti-colonial struggle. And we feel that is a just struggle. We feel that every colonized African who is gunned down in the city of St. Peter, anywhere else in this country, like George Floyd or like Mike Brown, we feel that our response is to fight against that relationship. Our responsibility is to fight against our oppression and our domination. And that means organizing a revolutionary capacity to make that possible. And that means that we unite with any force because we understand that colonialism is a global system and that it has interests everywhere throughout the world. Everywhere that they are talking about we have a relationship with, the U.S. is there right now plundering people's resources. But they are not under investigation. Just a few weeks ago, the Uhuru House was attacked in broad daylight, where an arsonist came to the Uhuru House and burned down and attempted to burn our red, black, and green flag that waves at our offices down. There was no FBI investigation into that person who tried to burn down our flag. There was no response from the FBI and the St. Pete Police Department to respond to this attack that came against our Uhuru House. And we also understand that that's not a coincidence. That the only revolutionary organization that's done something here on the ground practically for African people is the one that's come under attack. The institution that offers a community radio station, a newspaper, a commercial kitchen, an Aquaba Hall rental space, and community office for our organizers, that was the building that has come under attack. And in St. Louis, where we have incredible economic projects that have transformed the conditions of our community. Not the US government. No politician ever did that for our community, but it was us, the Uhuru movement, that made that possible. And today, this process is disrupting a meeting that we're supposed to have around initiating a project, the African Women Doula Project, that can make it possible for African women to deliver babies safely in our community. This process is interrupting that as I speak. And what this is a propaganda campaign against Russia. In that press conference where I have my ear pressed to the door, they are talking about interference in local elections and social media. No, I'll tell you, it's Mark Zuckerberg that interferes with the ability for people to communicate with one another and express their genuine interests. That's who was at the security conference for the US government. It's Mark Zuckerberg who's responsible for that. And the US is attempting to explain its own contradictions with Russia because it cannot rule in the same old way. It does not have the unity of its entire population. That's what Trump represented. And they say it was Russia intervention in the elections. They say it's an undemocratic process. What does the U.S. know about genuine democracy when it takes the ability for African people to feed, clothe, and house ourselves on a daily basis? You want to talk about destabilization? Talk to Nicaragua, talk to Venezuela, talk to Cuba, talk to Russia, and ask about undemocratic processes. That's what we're engaged in right now. And they are attempting to attack this organization. They are attempting to isolate the Black Power movement. That's what they are attempting to do. And we can have relationships with whoever we want, whoever we see fit possible to make this revolution possible. We will have a relationship with them.
It sounds like you're not denying working with Mr. Ivanov and the Russian government. You're not denying that?
Look, they're raiding our properties as we speak. Whatever you want to know, they'll let you know what we have and what we have not done. But I will say this, that we unite with any force that is willing to unite in our anti-colonial struggle. And that part is clear. We will not refuse to engage with others around the world who want to see this system go. We will not refuse that. That's what I'll say about that.
If you are working with the Russian government, were you not concerned at all that
the U.S. is working with every colonial government in the world, and nobody is saying a damn thing about what the U.S. is doing in Africa. What they don't raid the homes and ask white people any questions after they come back from Israel, where they're murdering Palestinian people every single day. They don't flash bomb their homes. They don't send the police there, even though they went into international waters in a place where they are killing Palestinians on a daily basis. Nobody is asking them any questions about their affiliation. The U.S. is affiliated with all the undemocratic forces around the world attempting to oppress African and other colonized people.
Why not register as a foreign agent?
Why would we register as a foreign agent? We recognize that this is an illegitimate settler colony, that the only foreigners here are Europeans themselves who came here and stole this indigenous land at gunpoint. That's who needs to register as a foreign alien or whatever. It's the U.S. government.
Are you unindicted co-conspirator number 4?
What does it state? Because they didn't give us any of that paperwork. You want to know my name? Because I can tell you.
Co-conspirator 4, whose identity is known to the grand jury, was a United States citizen residing in St. Petersburg and the director of agitation and propaganda.
I stated my name is Akile Anayi. I'm the director of agitation and propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party. I ran for office in 2017 and 2019 on a platform of reparations, the first time that was ever done in this country. Under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. It was the African People's Socialist Party that did that campaign. It was African. See my public records and the donors that came through that we have to report publicly. See that? See, check our public records. You want to be a part of the state's investigation? You check their public records and see what resources we accepted.
Yes or no? Did you accept Russian money as part of your...
You are trying to make this discussion about something that it is not. You want to know what this real problem is about? If you are genuinely interested to know what this situation is about, not live in fancy land about whether or not I accepted money from Russians, this is real. Not the way you want to see it, not the way you want to control the narrative. What I'm talking about right now is that they're using Russia as a part of a propaganda tool against the people to turn you away, to win, first of all, win your unity with the U.S. government. The U.S. government has no ability to answer any of your questions. None. It can't solve any of your problems, and they tell you that it's Russia's fault. Russia is not in your community causing you to starve. Russia is not in your community pushing you out. Russia is not the St. Pete Police Department that killed Tyron Lewis in 1996. It was not Russia. It was the U.S. government that did that.
Are you concerned about being arrested yourself?
I am not concerned about what the crisis of imperialism and how it will act. No, I'm not.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not really late for all this stuff. This seems like a lot, right?
Yeah, it's a lot.
Right
It started 600 years ago.
Yeah, so what exactly is the FBI accusing you guys of?
They are accusing us of this is what they're making it about. And I want to be clear, this is what they're making it about. Because the African People's Socialist Party has been here for 50 years. And this is not the first time we've come under any kind of assault, FBI investigation, or anything like that. This will always be the case as we try to fight for our freedom, because African freedom comes at the expense of U.S. interests. That's just how that goes. And a couple years ago, they labeled Africans who would struggle in their own interests as black identity extremists. They have terrorist designations for people like us who want to fight for our freedom. So I want to make that clear, that this is what they're saying it's about, but they need an entry point to be able to attack our movement, and this is the one that they're using. But they are accusing us of conspiring with the Russian government for, I can't even tell you because it don't really make that much sense. You know what I'm saying? So this is what they are accusing us of conspiring with the Russian government, and for whatever purposes and interests they have not explained, but I guess this comes at the expense of U.S. democracy, which isn't that very democratic. So. Well, we keep with our position, we continue doing what we've always done, which is organize our community towards African revolution. And we organize a response to this, just like we have in this response right now, just like we're able to put out and define what this struggle is about. That's what we'll continue to do, and we'll continue to organize as necessary around whatever they try to drill down the pipeline. But like I said, this isn't the first time, our first go around with the FBI. So we are prepared, you know, to take it where it needs to go into the full length of however long this investigations last. We will organize around it. And that's another thing. You touch me, you touch the African People's Socialist Party, you touch Chairman Omali Yeshitela, you touch Deputy Chair Onizine Yeshitela, any member of the African People's Socialist Party, you touch a member of the African nation. This is an international organization. We have bases throughout the world. So you don't just touch an individual, you touch an entire organization, and you touch an entire people who are counting on this movement right here to lead us to freedom.
Why work with Russia, who is a known U.S. adversary? Why work with them and be unregistered? Why take their money? Why work with
Did I ever say I took any money? See, no. I never, no. That's what I'm accused of. I never said that, so don't put that in my mouth. I didn't say that. Look, I don't want to answer your question because you want to take it somewhere. I don't want to take it there. I've defined this for you. No, I will let them tell it because that's the people you'll believe. That's the people you'll believe. But you want to ask any question about why we would affiliate ourselves with anybody that is willing to unite with the anti-colonial struggle? That's what your question is, essentially, for us.
Why a U.S. adversary that we've had issues with in the past? Why work with them?
Because I don't identify with you and the U.S. government. I don't identify with that. I detest the U.S. government and what it does to African people on a daily basis. That's what we are here for, because we refuse to allow the system anymore to take the lives of African people. That is a logical thing for me to do.
You do understand what the indictment is about unregistered co-conspirators. I mean, you understand what they're doing.
I understand what they are saying this is about, and I'm telling you what it's about for real, in the real world. Not how you want to see the world, but what it actually is. This is happening in the context of Russia at war with Ukraine. This is happening in the context of our building being potentially burned down. This is happening in that context.
Do you think, is Russia, are they the good guys in the war against Ukraine? Do you think, from your perspective, like who's the good guy, who's the bad guy?
Russia, we are in support of Russia, I'll say that. African People's Socialist Party, and that's been public. That's been public.
I want to understand.
You're trying to understand.
Right. Why would you support a larger country invading a sovereign country?
Because you don't know the history. You don't know the history. You don't know the history of Ukraine and Russia. And you don't know that Ukraine is just a cover for the world colonial powers. You don't understand that. That's why we are against world colonial powers. That's what we are against. And if Russia is against world colonial powers, then we support Russia. That's only logical. That is available online at Burning Spear TV on YouTube. That webinar is available. Yes.
You know this guy. You know Alexander.
She just said it. We've had this discussion. This was a virtual discussion, so it's virtual.
Will you continue to work with Russia, or at this point, based on this?
We will continue to work with any force that supports the anti-colonial African revolution. We'll work with them.
Is it possible they're using you?
The African People's Socialist Party is an organization that's been here for 50 years. because it's a backwards question. Because it presupposes that African people don't have the capacity to lead and struggle ourselves, but we do. And Chairman Omali Yeshitela founded this organization over 50 years ago, in which created the capacity for the African working class to determine our own futures. Russia don't determine Africa. Nobody else determines Africa but African people ourselves. And that is an insulting question. The African People's Socialist Party stands on its own and is able to make determinations for itself, which we've been doing for the last 50 years. I didn't in the 2020 election, in the presidential election, well, there wasn't anybody speaking to my interests. And when nobody saying reparations to African people, nothing. So ain't nobody get my vote.
But in theory, there are groups you would say no to, right?
There are groups we would say no to that would work against the interests of our community and our people and the struggle. Yes, we would say absolutely no. We would say no to the Democratic Party. We would say no to the Republican Party. We would say no to the Green Party. We would say no to these forces that work against or try to maintain this social system. So, yeah, we can't say no.
So as of now, I mean, you're listed in the indictment, not your name, but are you, so they have not said you're being charged for anything like that yet?
Nope. We don't even have the indictment. So we have no idea. We have, this is...
Ever crossed your mind that this was maybe a bad idea? That this could happen? I mean, when you're talking to Russia...
I think you really got to know history, because when you see the Black Power movement of the 1960s and what happened to the Panthers and what happened to, Africans who were organizing during that time, they got gunned down, they were thrown in prison, all these kinds of things happened to our struggle. And I voluntarily joined this struggle, recognizing that this is the history of what this government does to a people that struggles for its freedom. It struggles for true democracy. This is what it does to the people. So, no, I did not enter this work being afraid or thinking that this was a bad decision. I follow the leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and African internationalism, and it does not steer me wrong.
So there's never a concern that again, working with a...
It doesn't matter what we do. It doesn't matter what we do.
And you're not willing to say that you did not take money?
I'm not willing to say anything without my lawyer present.
But you may have taken money.
I'm not willing to say anything without my lawyer present. I will not confirm that for you. No, he was not arrested. He was put in handcuffs, as well as our deputy chair, Onizane Yeshitela. But they were not. Yes, they were released from handcuffs. But their house was broken into. This is St. Louis, where our party is currently headquartered.
Did it used to be headquartered in St. Louis?
It did, yes.
Why did it move up to St. Louis?
Because we found a more strategic base right there in St. Louis. So we have, we have a presence all throughout the U.S. and we have leadership in all of these different places. Every region in the U.S. we have leadership, but the most strategic leadership right now is in the center of the U.S., which is St. Louis. Russia's the big bad guy that intervenes in local elections or something like that. When the U.S. government has this practice, it's a historic practice where the U.S. government takes elected officials that the people put into office and destabilizes that government and outs them out. No, it's not. It's directly connected. You want to see it as another story, but it's exactly the same.
I understand your point. I'm not even...
You can't possibly understand my point.
I do. But I guess what I'm saying is they're accusing the Russian government of
Yes.
working...
I understand the propaganda campaign that's being waged against Russia to make Russia the big bad guy when it's the U.S. government that has had this reign on the entire world for all this time. This is what you want to make it about. Russia is the big bad guy. Russia's the problem. Russia is not in my community doing any of this stuff to me. It's not the reason why me as an African woman is catching hell. It's just not. It's not responsible for that. And that's what we have to make clear. Well, I mean, I was approached this morning at 6 a.m., so that would be the first I've heard about this.
Then you call ahead of time, right?
No, they did not. Actually, they lured me out of my house under false pretenses. They told me my car got broken into. It didn't. They were doing the breaking in, the police and the FBI.
That have been scattered across Africa. General Langley, I have constituents that have been scattered across Africa on train and equip missions. So just ballpark, in the last decade, how many Africans has the United States military trained and equipped?
Congressman, I don't have that figure. I can get that figure for you.
Ballpark, just, how many?
Congressman, it would be a wild guess, right?
Seems like something we should know, right?
Over the years, we have trained a substantial number, especially in the Gulf of Guinea states, but including
like more than 10,000.
It is more than 10,000.
More than 50,000.
I'd say we're reaching around 50,000 at least.
And what percentage of the people we've trained end up participating in insurrections or coups against their own government?
Very small number. Congressman. Very small number.
So what percentage do you think?
I'd say probably less than 1%.
But it does happen.
The IMEC program is in force, and we've pushed a significant number through our schools across the.
Yeah, and what data sets do you track to arrive at the conclusion that less than 1% of the roughly 50,000 that we've trained have participated in coups? Because it'd be like about 500, about 1% of 50,000.
Congressman, you may have that information. I don't at this time, but I know.
Well, I know there are some, right? Like go ahead and throw up that image. This is Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, and this is a photo of him. Did we train and equip him in Guinea?
By name, I cannot identify that.
Well, that guy in the middle with the big red hat, Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, that's him with a bunch of U.S. service members outside of our embassy. And just months after this photo was taken in 2021, he led a coup in Guinea and threw out the leader. Does that concern you?
Congressman, core values is what we start off with in IMA programs.
Do we share core values with Colonel Doumbouya?
Core values. I will repeat that. Core values. Respect for humanity.
Do we share those values with Colonel Doumbouya?
Absolutely. In our curriculum.
He led a coup?
We do.
Okay, well, that's a very telling answer. In Burkina Faso, did we share core values with the leader that we trained there who led a coup?
It's in our curriculum. We
Leading
stress
coups
core
are in our
values.
curriculum?
We request civilian-led governance.
Wait, hold on. Is leading coups in our curriculum?
Absolutely not.
So
civilian-led.
My question is, do we share core values with the coup leader in Burkina Faso, who we trained?
Holistically, we teach core values with a respect for civilian governance, apolitical, and that's what sticks across a very high percentage in the 99 percentile.
Right? But not everybody. And when I wonder how many people it takes to plan a coup. I mean, initially you didn't know how many we trained and equipped. Then you said it was 1%. You had no basis for that 1% number because there's no data set you track. Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record. Another U.S. trained soldier stages a coup in West Africa by The Intercept.
Without objection, so ordered.
And I further seek unanimous consent to enter into the record. U.S. forces trained the Guinean colonel behind the recent coup in West African country, and this is regard to Guinea.
Without objection, so ordered.
So I guess the question is, why should U.S. taxpayers be paying to train people who then lead coups in Africa?
Congressman, our curriculum harvests core values and also to be able to embolden these countries for a representative democracy.
But General, that democracy isn't what emerges. The problem is, I know you may have great confidence in what you're teaching, but when two governments have been overthrown, I guess how many governments have to be overthrown by people we train before you sort of get the message that our core values might not be sticking with everyone? Is it 5 countries? 10?
We'll continue with our persistence in assuring
but do you think it's
that they harbor democratic norms, democratic values.
Just a moment ago,
apolitical.
You said we shared core values with Colonel Doumbouya. You said that just moments ago in response to my question, and his core value seems to be leading a coup. So I don't think it's stuck. I think we should at least know how many countries we train the coup plotters in. How many is too many? Because clearly 2 is not too many, and I think we could use our resources far more effectively than doing this.
Co-founder Roger Waters' current solo tour, instead of turning down the politics, he's amping them up to 11. Last time out, he preached against Donald Trump and in favor of Palestine. This tour, twice delayed by COVID and ominously titled "This Is Not a Drill," includes references to police murdering black men, semi-automatic weapons and abortion, and giant video screens in the shape of a cross. Waters guitarist Jonathan Wilson has explained why Waters' tour differs from those of fellow older classic rockers. Quote, "Even the Stones or members of the Beatles, it's more of a trip down memory lane than it is a current show. The activism, that's sort of the key to the whole thing." As a longtime fan of Waters' music who doesn't always agree with his messaging, I wanted to ask him about his mix of performing and preaching. things got a bit animated.
Basically, my message hasn't changed. I recognize your humanity, but I recognize all the Russians and the Chinese and the Ukrainians and the Yemenis and the Palestinians.
Are you an equal opportunity offender on this tour? Here's why I ask. I remember the last tour. Of course, I came and watched. Very much, about Trump. And in the current show, you've got a montage of war criminals, according to you, and a picture apparently of President Biden on the screen, and it says, "Just getting started." What's that all about?
President Joe Biden?
Yeah.
Well, he's fueling the fire in the Ukraine for a start. That is a huge crime. Why won't the United States of America encourage Zelensky, the president, to negotiate, obviating the need for this horrendous war that's killing?
You're blaming.
We don't know how many Ukrainians.
But you're blaming the party that got invaded. Come on, you've got it reversed.
That's any war. When did it start? What you need to do is look at the history, and you can say, well, it started on this day. You could say it started in 2008. Okay, this war is basically about the action and reaction of NATO pushing right up to the Russian border, which they promised they wouldn't do when Gorbachev negotiated the withdrawal of the USSR from the whole of Eastern Europe.
When you say this, then I have to say, what about our role as liberators? You of all people,
you have no role as liberators.
World War II. World War II.
You got into World War II because
Come on.
Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor. You were completely isolationist until that sad, that devastating,
I would argue
awful
we were
day
always going to get in, and that
1941.
pushed us in. But thank God the United States got in, right? You lost your father in World War II. Thank God the United States.
But thank God the Russians had already won the bloody war almost by then. Don't forget, 23 million Russians died, protecting you and me from the Nazi menace.
Hey, and you would think the Russians would have learned their lesson from war and wouldn't have invaded Ukraine.
Well, you, with all your reading, I would suggest to you, Michael, that you go away and read a bit more and then try and figure out what the United States would do if the Chinese were putting nuclear-armed missiles into Mexico and Canada.
The Chinese are too busy encircling Taiwan as we speak, okay?
They're not encircling Taiwan. Taiwan is part of China, and that's been absolutely accepted by the whole of the international community since 1948. And if you don't know that, you're not reading enough. Go and read about it.
Okay, did we solve anything here today?
Yeah, we did. Well, no, we didn't.
I mean,
Nancy, you're believing your propaganda, your side's propaganda.
You're defining it as
Taiwan,
propaganda.
you can't have a conversation about human rights, and you can't have a conversation about Taiwan without actually doing the reading.
Roger, if you're having a conversation about human rights, at the top of the list of offenders are the Chinese. Why is it always the Western world?
At the top of your list.
Why is it
the
always
Chinese
the Western
didn't
world?
invade Iraq and kill 1 million people in 2003. In fact, as far as I can recall, hang on a minute, who have the Chinese invaded and murdered, slaughtered?
Their own.
Bollocks.
Okay.
That's absolute nonsense. Complete nonsense. You should go away and read, but read some.
Azov Battalion. The supposed heroes may now bring terror back to their masters, especially in the USA. Riding a tiger, keep riding, and feeding those who can consume you is dangerous. Even if temporarily satisfied, they'll seek to consume you again and again. It has been documented that the US has frequently been seen feeding snakes that later betrayed the country. The Taliban's ascent in Afghanistan has been attributed largely to the United States of America. In order to fight the Soviet Union, the US initially supplied the Mujahids with weapons and training in the late 1990s. As a result, the Taliban and Mujahideen were able to seize control of a large portion of Afghanistan and install a fundamentalist Islamic government. The US also provided financial support to the Taliban during the period of their government in Afghanistan, including military and economic aid. This enabled the Taliban to maintain their control over large parts of the country and to enforce their harsh interpretation of Islamic law. Then the 9/11 attack happened, and so the US realized that the Taliban they created has turned into the Frankenstein's monster. The US also did not initially recognize the severity of Hitler's actions and intentions when he was spreading havoc in Europe. It was only after the invasion of Poland in September 1939 and the subsequent declaration of war by the UK and France that the gravity of the situation became clear. In 2023, history is repeating itself all over again. Remember the so-called Azov Battalion, of which several prisoners of war were killed by the Ukrainian missile strike, now appears to be spreading ruckus in the USA. A terror conspiracy has been foiled in Baltimore, Maryland. Reportedly, a conspiracy to stage a terrorist attack in city was foiled by American authorities, and the conspirators were connected to the Ukrainian Azov Battalion. However, connections between the Azov Battalion and the conspirators are conspicuously absent from US liberal media's coverage of this story. The conspirators named Sarah Beth Clendaniel and Brandon Clint Russell were charged with conspiring to destroy energy substations in Baltimore by the US Justice Department. According to authorities, the duo's plans were driven by the ideology of racially motivated hatred. Each of them could receive a 20-year sentence if found guilty. The two planned a series of attacks against substations beginning in June 2022, though possibly earlier, using balloons and rifle fire in an effort to shoot out power transformers and rob thousands of residents of light and heat. When the grid was under stress and energy demand was at its peak, they specifically intended to carry out this terror attack. Russell founded Atomwaffen Division, an international neo-Nazi terrorist organization based on the ideologies of Azov Battalion Group, which is also known as the National Socialist Resistance Front. He was imprisoned in January 2018 for illegally storing explosives and possessing an unregistered destructive device. Prosecutors allege that an FBI bomb technician planned to use the material in terrorist attacks across the US against civilians, nuclear facilities, and synagogues. He claimed the material was sufficient to completely destroy an airliner. In addition, the attempted terrorist attack might only be the beginning of the Azov members and their foreign allies' threat to Western nations. It is quite surprising and remarkable that the mainstream liberal media and US politicians have both largely ignored the federal busting of a domestic terror plot involving high-ranking members of a group that's clearly pose a serious threat to public safety. The administration of President Joe Biden has actively promoted the danger posed by racially motivated extremism, yet he has not discussed anything about this expose. The reason behind this is pretty obvious. Biden himself praised Azov Battalion earlier. Now, how can he suddenly go against them? Given the Azov Battalion's neo-Nazi connections, both Canada and the US had once declared that they won't recognize the Azov terrorists. Representative Max Rose was one of the 40 US congressmen who signed a letter in October 2019 urging the US State Department to label Azov as a foreign terrorist organization, but their request was unsuccessful. Representative Alyssa Slotkin made the same request to the Biden administration in April of last year, along with other organizations. Social media and internet was filled with media reports that the Azov Battalion is a neo-Nazi group, which is illegitimate and wrong. However, after the Ukraine war, things took a 180-degree turn. West started garnering widespread international support for Azov's. Social media platforms too tweaked their policy to support the Azov's ideologies. The Azov Battalion has now become West's most crucial weapon against Russia. It has a sophisticated force and is also in possession of lethal weapons. Zelensky has officially merged Azov fighters into the Ukrainian army, so it wouldn't be wrong to claim Azov Battalion is now the Ukrainian army. And the man who is connected to the Ukrainian army was ready to carry out terrorist activities in the USA, leaving thousands, possibly millions, without power and even life. It is a dark and open secret that Azov fighters have a Nazi mindset, and this is why Russia, in its invasion, addressed for the denazification of Ukraine. But more than Ukraine or Russia, Europe needs to worry about terror attacks by Azov Battalion, as it is being predicted they are next. In July 2022, Europol had already predicted that the Ukraine war could lead to an increase in the trafficking of firearms and munitions into the EU via established smuggling routes or online platforms, which will eventually lead to rise in terror and criminal activities. It was also cautioned that this threat might even be higher once the conflict has ended. Since then, there have been numerous claims that criminal elements in Kiev have been using the weapons that were sent there to sell them on the black market. For the US and EU countries, the massive influx of extremist elements joining or training with the Azov Battalion and the large number of weapons being sent to Ukraine, many of which are unaccounted for, should be very concerning. The atom weapon plot in Baltimore might just be the tip of the iceberg. There are no strict laws or border checks for Ukrainians entering the EU's territory. Consequently, this begs the question of where the weapons are being used and precisely who is a terrorist posing as a regular migrant. The West might once again find itself in a catch-22 situation. They will be caught in a situation where moving in either direction would be disastrous. While arming them will only increase their potential as a threat, leaving the Azov Battalion completely will ensure that the US and Azovs are at odds, ushering in a new era of terror. Biden and his Western buddies created a mess of a situation. Seriously, they should have avoided lending a helping hand to these anarchists. The Western countries got so blinded by their ambition to destroy Russia that they did not realize they were nurturing a monster in the name of Azov.
There's no doubt about it, we're living in times of catastrophic crisis where the lives of innocent civilians are sacrificed in the wars of their masters. Yes, in Ukraine, but not only. Since the last plenary, tens of thousands of Afghani citizens have been forced to flee in search of food and safety. 5 million children face famine, an agonising and painful death. A 500% increase in child marriages and children being sold just so they can survive, and not a mention of it. Not here, not anywhere. No wall-to-wall TV coverage, no emergency humanitarian response, no special plenaries, not even a mention in this plenary. No Afghani delegations and no statements. My God, they must be wondering, what makes their humanitarian crisis so unimportant? Is it the colour of their skin? Is it that they're not white? They're not European? That their problems come from a US gun or a US invasion? Is it that the decision to rob their country's wealth was taken by a despotic US president rather than a Russian one? Because, my God, all wars are evil and all victims deserve support, and until we get on that page, we have no credibility whatsoever. The state sponsor of terrorism is a term of US law. It doesn't exist in EU law. But a Zelensky advisor called for it in the Parliament magazine, and here we are again reporting for duty. And all it will do is make peace harder to achieve. Exactly, of course, what the extremists want. No peace, no off-ramps, all bridges burning, and Ukraine a permanent abattoir in a suicidal holy crusade against Russia. So, if you want to start naming state sponsors of terrorism, let's do it. European sponsorship of Israeli terrorism in Palestine, Western sponsorship of Saudi terror in Yemen, ISIS, the product of French, American, British, Turkish and Gulf sponsorship in Syria and Iraq. Decades of right-wing US-backed terrorism against the Cuban Revolution, the Contras in Nicaragua, death squads in Guatemala, in El Salvador. Remember Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, horror after horror, terror after terror. There's nothing constructive about the pot calling the kettle black. Would he ever cop on, start championing peace and enter the war which is patently in the interests of EU?
Being handed over to the World Health Organization, and this happens in about 4 days, right? February 27th.
Right. So over the next few days, the World Health Organization and member states are going to work out the details of this intergovernmental negotiating body meeting that happens on February 27th. And what they're trying to do is hand over power to the World Health Organization to dictate policies for future pandemics. The Biden administration last fall released a statement with the WHO saying, we see the need for this. We like it. We think it's important. We're going to do this. We're all in. This is called the WHO CA+, so that's how I'm going to refer to it. All 194 WHO member states are going to allow the WHO the power to declare and manage global pandemic emergencies. That means they could mandate lockdowns. They could mandate vaccines. They could dictate vaccine supplies and distribution. And they can monitor and put in place surveillance of entire populations. I'm going to show you the language because I went through the CA Plus today that hands this to them. Here is what the draft of this treaty, because it's only in draft form right now. Here's what it says. Here's the vision, is that it aims for a world where pandemics are effectively controlled to protect present and future generations from pandemics and their devastating consequences, and to advance the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health for all peoples based on the basis of equity, human rights, and solidarity, with a view to achieving universal health coverage while recognizing the sovereign rights of countries, acknowledging the difference in levels of development among countries respecting their national context, and recognizing relevant international instruments. So, okay, that sounds kind of nice, but it's predicated on the idea.
Wait, what part sounds nice?
I mean, the idea of like we all get equal access to medicines that we need.
So like, okay, sub-Saharan Africa that gets screwed, and wealthy countries get the medications, or they charge insane prices, or
well,
that
we
sort of.
saw this
right.
happen during the monkeypox outbreak because Africa's been suffering from monkeypox for decades now, and did not have access to vaccines. But as soon as Western countries have it, hey, here's some vaccines we can use. We've had it in our stockpiles.
And the WHO really already had that power during the this last pandemic, because they were sent any kind of notice on the bottom of your video, it was going by WHO guidelines. And so they were demonizing drugs already that were alternatives to what's on the market. So it's already happening. They're just going to make it more official now, it sounds.
Right. Yeah, right. They would shoot down things that were more natural curatives, etc., in favor of biopharmaceuticals that would make billions of dollars.
Yes, and the idea.
Not to mention.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Not to mention that like if they go with the whole international lockdown routine again, how does that work for distributing then across borders? If it's all then going to be global, are they going to just have to build like in all 194 states like the manufacturing for any kind of medication or anything that they would need? Because you can't lock down the borders and restrict international travel and then freely distribute what's needed to 194 countries. It seems like
they do address that, but it's not. It's light on the biopharmaceutical collaboration, because they say, we're going to talk about it in a bit, but it's like they encourage pharmaceuticals to work together and share technology so that each member state could make their own vaccines. But it's very loosely enforced in this language, unlike the surveillance language, which is not quite so loose. That's a really good question. Also, I just want to touch on the fact that the World Health Organization is saying, well, some countries did good and some countries didn't. And we don't have data to support this, that anybody sort of followed the WHO to a point and did better than anybody else. I think right now, disagree with me if you'd like, right now, it sort of feels like everyone came out of the pandemic the same, whether there was strict or not strict lockdowns. Like no one country was able to like do better through government policy.
In what way, though? In what way?
Outcomes of the pandemic. Like it does
schools,
feel like.
Well, we don't know yet fully, right? And I guess we won't know for a few years. But like kids not being locked down at home, and education being damaged, where they're set back a year or 2 years.
But I'm talking about just like getting through it, because we're now seeing that a lot of the deaths that we were told were COVID deaths were deaths with COVID. Fewer are being attributed to COVID. It seems like no actual government policy got one country through it better than another.
I think Switzerland did, or whatever, because if you're saying they didn't listen to government, U.S. government policy versus their own, because they didn't do all the things we did here, and they got through it much better than we did.
Yes.
And
okay.
I believe that was government.
Yes.
Yeah, let us know in the chat what you guys think. Let us know. Did any one country come out of this smelling like total roses? I mean, we use Sweden as an example, and some people say, like Brazil's still going through that. Well, they're still going through it for mandates issues and other things, of course. And now China that would fully lock down the no COVID policy. Then suddenly everyone got COVID last week or over the past few weeks. Like everyone got it, right? So that was not the solution. That was the awful solution.
And so the WHO is making the point that because everyone handled it differently, we need to make sure everyone handles it the same, even though it would seem to me that the data plays out that everyone handled it this differently and then ended up sort of like getting through it with a similar outcome. Like we all just had to survive it, just get through it, I guess. Is maybe survive is the wrong choice of words. But anyway, I don't think I can agree with the premise that the WHO, had all the right policies, and it's just that we had a bunch of countries acting as bad children who didn't.
Right. Like we and we should really point out who funds the World Health Organization, right? At the heart of this, the number one funder of the World Health Organization is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Number one, as Whitney Webb on our show has articulately laid out, right? So the amount of money that comes from a group that is intimately tied to the biopharmaceutical complex, making money off of this, and then has written books and laid out plans about how the next pandemic will unfold, is behind the World Health Organization.
Right.
At the heart of all of this.
Yeah. And I think the point I think history will eventually show that the countries with the fewest WHO related restrictions are the ones that may have done the best. That does seem, and so what they're saying here is we need more universal policy when it doesn't seem that policy actually got anyone through the pandemic.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. The Obama administration's internal legal justification for assassinating U.S. citizens without charge has been revealed for the first time. According to a secret Justice Department document obtained by NBC News, the Obama administration's claims it has the legal authority to target citizens who are, quote, senior operational leaders of al-Qaeda or an associated force, even if there is no intelligence indicating they are engaged in an active plot to attack the U.S. In September 2011, a U.S. drone strike in Yemen killed 2 American citizens, Anwar al-Awlaki and Samir Khan. The following month, another U.S. drone strike killed al-Awlaki's 16-year-old son, Abdurrahman al-Awlaki, who was born in Denver.
The document obtained by NBC News is described as a white memo that was provided to members of the Senate Intelligence and Judiciary Committees as a summary of a classified memo prepared by the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel. Last month, a federal judge denied a request by the American Civil Liberties Union and the New York Times for the Justice Department to disclose its legal justification for the targeted killing of Americans. The Obama administration's secrecy around the drone program is expected to be a top issue at this week's confirmation hearing of White House counterterrorism advisor John Brennan to be director of the CIA. Brennan has been dubbed by critics to be Obama's assassination czar. Joining us now is Jamil Jaffer, deputy legal director of the ACLU and director of the ACLU's Center for Democracy. You've looked at the white memo. This is something you've been asking for quite some time, Jamil. Talk about its significance. Go through it with us point by point.
Well, it's a very significant document, and it's a remarkable document, and it's something that everybody really ought to read in the same way that everybody ought to read the torture memos from the last administration. It sets out, or professes to set out, the power that the government has to carry out the targeted killing of American citizens who are located far away from any battlefield, even when they have not been charged with a crime, even when they do not present any imminent threat in any ordinary meaning of that word. So it's a pretty sweeping power that's been set out, and the memo purports to provide a legal justification for that power and explain why the limits on that power can't be enforced in any court.
The confidential Justice Department white paper that you're talking about, Jamil Jaffer, introduces a more expansive definition of self-defense or imminent attack than any articulated by the U.S. government before. It reads, quote, the condition that an operational leader present an imminent threat of violent attack against the United States does not require the United States to have clear evidence that a specific attack on U.S. persons and interests will take place in the immediate future. Can you talk about the significance of that and how exactly imminent is defined in this document, or not defined?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you have to start with the acknowledgement that there are circumstances in which the government has the authority and maybe even the responsibility to use lethal force. Even if you think about it domestically, somebody's running down the street, waving a gun around, threatening civilians, the government doesn't have to go to a judge beforehand to seek a warrant to carry out that use of lethal force. But that's a situation in which the threat is imminent in the ordinary meaning of the term. There's not time to go to a judge. There's not time for deliberation. But the kind of imminence that the government is defining here, or the way that the government has defined the term here, is much, much broader. They're talking about situations in which the person presents no immediate threat. There's no known plot. These people are located far away from any actual battlefield, so you're not talking about a situation in which there are battlefield exigencies that the government has to worry about. You're really talking about something that looks a lot more like a law enforcement context. And in that context, the traditional rule is the government has the authority to use lethal force only in very narrow circumstances. And this memo really redefines those circumstances entirely.
Let's turn to Attorney General Eric Holder, a comment he made last March when he outlined what the White House billed as the legal rationale for its claimed right to kill U.S. citizens who belong to al-Qaeda or associated forces.
It is an unfortunate but undeniable fact that some of the threats that we face come from a small number of United States citizens who have decided to commit violent attacks against their own country from abroad. Based on generations-old legal principles and Supreme Court decisions handed down during World War II, as well as during this current conflict, it's clear that United States citizenship alone does not make such individuals immune from being targeted.
Jamil Jaffer, respond to Attorney General Eric Holder.
Well, it's not a question of immunity. This is kind of a straw man. Nobody is arguing that Americans are entirely immune from the government's use of lethal force. The question is, under what circumstances can the government use lethal force? And again, for very good reason, those circumstances have traditionally been defined very narrowly. Now what the government is doing is creating an extremely broad category of people who can be targeted without judicial review before the fact, without judicial assessment of the evidence after the fact. It's a very dangerous thing that the government is doing, and I think that at some level, I think the people who have written this memo and the people who are exercising this authority in the Obama administration must be convinced of their own trustworthiness. But even if you accept that the people who are now in office are trustworthy in this sense, this power is going to be available to the next administration and the one after that, and it's going to be available in every future conflict, not just the conflict against al-Qaeda. And according to the administration, the power is available all over the world, not just on geographically cabined battlefields. So it really is a sweeping proposition.
But what does it mean, though, that it's not an official legal memo? It's a white paper. Does that have any legal significance or implications?
Well, you know, some people have been saying that this is a kind of transparency, that the administration, through these kinds of leaks, is giving the public the ability to assess the strength of the administration's legal arguments. And the truth is that this is really just a briefing document. It's not a legal memo. It does tell us a little bit about the authority that the government is claiming, but the actual legal memos are still secret. We've been litigating for those memos now for 18 months or 2 years. The administration has refused to release them. We've just appealed one case to the Second Circuit here in New York, to the appeals court here in New York.
Can you explain the case? What is the case that your organization, the ACLU,
So there are two Freedom of Information Act cases that we're litigating right now. One is here in New York, and the other one is in D.C. One of them is an effort to get the legal memos. We're litigating that case with the New York Times. They have a parallel request. The other case, which is in D.C., is about principally civilian casualties, the question of who has been killed in these drone strikes, because the administration has not released numbers, and we're reliant on the work of very good organizations outside the administration to do that kind of work. We think that the administration should release its own numbers.
And who's been killed? You mean U.S. citizens and non-U.S. citizens?
Right, absolutely. So most of the people who are being killed in these drone strikes aren't U.S. citizens, right? There have only been 4 U.S. citizens, 3 in 2011, 1 in 2002. The rest have been non-citizens, killed, some of them in Pakistan, some of them in Yemen, some of them in Somalia. According to the figures of the Bureau of Investigative Journalism in the UK, we're now talking about somewhere on the order of 4,000 people who've been killed with these drones. And the administration still hasn't released the legal memos that purport to justify that program. So one of the cases that we're litigating, the one here in New York, is the effort to get that justification. This memo, this briefing paper, provides us a little more information about that justification, but it's not the justification itself. For the same reasons that the government was right in 2009 to release the torture memos, we think the government should release the targeted
Let's
killing
get
memos.
specific. I saw you in Sundance at one of the premieres of Jeremy Scahill and Rick Rowley's film called Dirty Wars, The World is a Battlefield. And it tells the story, among others, of Abdurrahman Al-Awlaki, 16-year-old kid born in Denver, killed in a drone strike 2 weeks after his father was killed in a drone strike in Yemen. Talk about his case and how this relates. Right. When does the U.S. stop? What is the justification for killing this 16-year-old boy?
Well, so 2 things about that. First, I think one of the most chilling aspects of the power that the government is claiming here is that they're claiming the authority to do all of this in secret. Not just keep it secret from the courts or keep their justification secret from the courts, but keep the exercise of this power secret so they can carry out these killings of American citizens, among many others, without even acknowledging to the public or to any court that they have exercised that authority. And that really is a chilling proposition. But that's one thing, and that's one of the things that they've done in the Abdul Rahman case. They have failed to acknowledge that they actually carried out this killing, although everybody knows it to be true. But we have other litigation which we're doing with the Center for Constitutional Rights. It's a constitutional case on behalf of the 3 U.S. citizens who were killed in 2011, including Abdul Rahman, the 16-year-old. And that's a case in which we are raising claims under the 4th Amendment and the 5th Amendment, the Due Process Clause, arguing that the government does not have the right, again, except in these extremely narrow circumstances, to carry out targeted killings without judicial review. And the government's response to that lawsuit has not been to defend their authority on the merits. They're not actually saying we have the right to do this. They haven't actually filed any of those arguments in court. Instead, what they're arguing is this question of whether the government acted lawfully or not is a political question committed to the political branches, and the judges have no role to play, no role whatsoever to play in assessing whether the killing of an American citizen was lawful or not.
How does it stop? Where does it stop? You kill them in Yemen, American citizens and others, no trial, no charge. What about in the United States?
There's no line. You know, if you look at the memo, the briefing paper that was released yesterday, there's no geographic line. And you can remember how most of the country reacted when President Bush declared the authority to hold American citizens detained in the United States. Most of the country said, you can't be serious, you're going to treat the United States as part of the battlefield. You're going to detain American citizens inside the United States as enemy combatants. And now the Obama administration, you know, if you accept the memo on its face, you accept the briefing paper on its face, the Obama administration is making, in some ways, a greater claim of authority. They're arguing that the authority to kill American citizens has no geographic limit.
I want to turn to comments made by John Brennan. John Brennan, who is Obama's counterterrorism advisor and now his pick for CIA director. He made these comments last May and publicly confirmed that the United States has used drones to conduct targeted killings overseas.
President Obama believes that done carefully, deliberately, and responsibly, we can be more transparent and still ensure our nation's security. So let me say it as simply as I can. Yes, in full accordance with the law And in order to prevent terrorist attacks on the United States and to save American lives, the United States government conducts targeted strikes against specific al-Qaeda terrorists, sometimes using remotely piloted aircraft, often referred to publicly as drones. And I'm here today because President Obama has instructed us to be more open with the American people about these efforts.
That was Obama's nominee for CIA Director John Brennan speaking last May. Jamil Jaffer, your comments on what he said about drone attacks.
Well, this is I think, in some ways, good timing for the release of this briefing paper because, as you mentioned, John Brennan has been nominated to head the CIA.
In the war in Ukraine that we want to get to, including big admissions from NATO that Ukraine will become a member of NATO after all, the United States admitting it can't track any of the weapons heading into Ukraine, and President Trump saying that we're all headed for World War III. This may be one of the most dangerous periods in American history. For more context and nuance, let's bring in Colonel Douglas Macgregor. Colonel, great to see you. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks.
So let's start with the comments from NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg admitting that Ukraine will become a NATO member. Said it pretty emphatically. Listen.
After the war, what's the external growth?
So both NATO allies have agreed that Ukraine will become a member of our alliance, but at the same time, that is a long-term perspective. What is the issue now is to ensure that Ukraine prevail as a sovereign independent nation, and that therefore we need to support Ukraine.
I see that the future of Ukraine is to be part of European Union and also member of NATO.
So, Colonel, what are your thoughts on that? NATO, it's getting a new member in Ukraine.
I don't think this is an admission as much as a stated goal. But having said that, I think the real purpose of this is to prevent any negotiations from being held. If you take the position that there is no alternative to NATO membership for Ukraine, you're effectively telling the Russians that their preference for a non-aligned neutral state in Ukraine is no longer up for discussion. That means Russians have to fight this war to the finish. There will be no negotiated settlement. And that's what Washington and London want. I don't think everyone else in Europe shares that view, but that's clearly the attitude in Washington and London.
So just wiping Ukraine off the map is the alternative? That's what Washington and London want?
Well, I don't think they want that necessarily. I know that the Russians don't want that, but you just leave the Russians no choice. If you tell them that at the end of this war, whatever that means and whenever that occurs, that Ukraine will be a member of NATO, that turns everything back to an existential threat to Russia. The Russians know that if they relent in any way, if they admit, for instance, that half of Ukraine can become part of Russia, in other words, the western half or something, then they've got the problem they had back in January and February, which is this huge anti-Russian force, highly trained, well-equipped army ready to attack them. So why would they do that? So this is designed to kill any hope for a negotiated settlement. That's all.
Fascinating. Then, of course, we have President of Ukraine Zelensky saying yesterday that American sons and daughters will have to shed blood in Ukraine, that's what we have to do in order to secure the victory.
The U.S. will have to send their sons and daughters exactly the same way as we are sending their sons and daughters to war, and they will have to fight. Because it's NATO that we're talking about, and they will be dying, God forbid, because it's a horrible thing.
What did you make of that?
Well, there are two things. So first of all, he's admitting the truth. Ukraine cannot win this war, and the losses they've taken fighting the Russians in southern Ukraine have been horrific. The Russians have invited the Ukrainians, now certainly since September, to attack them in southern Ukraine relentlessly, and that's exactly what the Ukrainians have done. And they have taken horrendous losses. In December, January, first part of February, they were losing 1,000 men a day. Before that, it was roughly a battalion a day of 500, 600, 700. I think they're back to about a battalion a day now. It's dropped simply because they've run out of troops. And they've decided that they're going to hold Bakhmut to the last man. There are about 2,000 to 3,000 of them in Bakhmut. They're trying to put more reinforcements in there, but Bakhmut has been a bloodbath for Ukraine. And for every Ukrainian or for every Russian soldier who is killed and wounded, there have been 7 or 8 Ukrainians killed or wounded. This is a losing proposition for them. So in that sense, he's being honest. The only way he can win is with NATO help, and specifically with us to come in, because obviously, with the exception of potentially the Poles, nobody else is going to join that. Now, the second part is this. Biden knows, and his advisors know, that if he tries to commit the United States to war in eastern Ukraine against Russia, he's finished. His administration is finished. It's over. That is not going to happen. That's an impossibility.
So then does Biden want another Afghanistan? I mean, on his resume, we have the Inspector General for the Afghan War, John Sopko, just coming out and saying that the American-made weapons falling into the wrong hands. We can't track any of these weapons. They're falling into all sorts. And now we have the admission that the Russians have captured American weapons. That's another big piece of the story we wanted to ask you about today. So the Inspector General for the Afghan War saying we're literally on the precipice of seeing another disaster like we saw in Afghanistan. I guess that's going to be on Biden's resume.
Well, I think that's probably inevitable because the Russians will win this. They will do whatever it takes. We will not. We have no vital strategic interest in Ukraine. It's certainly not in eastern Ukraine, never really did. And no one in Europe wants to march east to Moscow to end the war. Remember that Zelensky and his defense minister made a comment the other day that this war will end with Ukrainian tanks in Red Square. Well, that's absurd. It's never going to happen. So I think we just have to understand that this is a desperate situation. The Ukrainian government is very weak. It's held in power by these neo-Nazi radicals that threaten to murder anyone who threatens them. They're killing soldiers that leave the front, that try to escape. They're filling the ranks with old men, women, young boys. This is insanity. That's where we are. How long can this last? Well, that's up to the Russians, because the only way the Russians can put an end to this is to sweep north out of the south, to come down out of the north from Belarusia, surround Kiev and make it clear that they're through. That's what the Russians ultimately have to do. If they don't do that, this thing will just drag on. We'll continue to send things, and they'll continue to kill Ukrainians until there are almost none left. And remember that all the Ukrainian refugees that you talk to in Western Europe, there are perhaps 8 or 9 million of them. There are another 2 million inside Russia. They all say the same thing. We'll never go back. So they're not coming back. So the population has dropped from about 37.4 down to somewhere between 18 and 22 million. Ukraine is dead as a nation state, in my judgment. It's already dead. 40% of its cities, infrastructure is destroyed. All of its industrial base, everything that is of any real value in Ukraine, the Russians are sitting on. And that's traditionally been Russian, and the people who live there are Russian. That's the whole point. So I don't know where Ukraine goes from here other than what you just heard. And remember, every small state knows that if it wants to win, it can only win if it can drag in somebody bigger to win it for them. Serbia was successful in enticing Russia to join it in its fight against Austria-Hungary. That of course, precipitates World War I. We entered the war in 1917 and showed up in great strength in 1918 because the British and the French were losing the First World War to Germany. Had we not entered, we'd have ended up with a very different picture strategically in Europe. We were dragged in as a means of rescuing British and French imperialism. So, these things have happened before. I don't see any evidence that the American people will go along with this. And here's the other part. Our armed forces are in terrible shape.
Right.
I mean, who are you going to send? I think out of the entire army, somebody told me that we might be able to get 50,000 combat troops out there. That means the people that close with and destroy the enemy. The army is in shambles. I'm sure Milley has given this bad news to Biden and his friends. So I don't see anything like that happening. I think Zelensky is just hot air. He's saying whatever he has to try and stay in power. He wants us to do whatever is possible to keep him there. We want to keep him there. But the utility of maintaining him indefinitely is going to wear thin here over the next few months.
Well, it seems like it's happening at a heightened or quickened pace at this point, but it seems like the United States is continuing to ramp up the amount of weapons. It's unbelievable. We have two stories in the same day where Lockheed Martin is ramping up production of HIMARS, sending those in to appease the need in Ukraine, while at the same time we have this admission that the U.S. simply really has no idea where these weapons are even going. So it seems like, Colonel, that we're going to continue to send in these long-range weapons, and that's what Ukraine's asking for.
Well, remember, Clayton, we need to keep in mind that the money that supports all of this doesn't really leave Washington. It's just recycled through the military-industrial congressional complex machine.
Right.
So the Pentagon sends the things over and then takes the money that they get from Congress and they pour that into industry, the arms industry, telling them you have to replace what we're sending. And in addition to that, you need to produce more. And we're having trouble with that, by the way. We have no surge capacity. And people are talking about China right now. And what people don't understand in the United States, we did send our manufacturing base to China. That's true. We didn't do it voluntarily necessarily. It was done by the elites. They decided that was the way to make a buck. But the result is that China has an industrial base devoted to military production that is potentially twice the size of the industrial base we had during World War II. Now, we just snubbed China's proposal for peace. We wouldn't even consider it. And if you're sitting in Beijing and you had any reservations about assisting Russia, those are over. So you're going to send Russia whatever Russia needs because your assumption is, we in Beijing are next on the menu. If Russia fails, they'll go to war with us. We don't seem to understand our impact on the rest of the world, and what we've done to ourselves is create an insoluble problem. So as far as weapons go, yes, we're going to continue to dump them in there because people back here are enriching themselves. There are people in Ukraine enriching themselves. We know the Ukrainians resell things all the time. We see them in Kosovo. We see them down in Iraq. We see them all over the place. That's not news. Although I was told this morning that I guess it's the General Accounting Office, I'm not sure, the IG, several people in Washington said that we've now gotten control of everything, so we have perfect visibility on all the weapons and where it goes. That goes along with sightings of unicorns and elves and Santa Claus and the Good Fairy.
Right.
But that's where we are. So no, it's not going to change. It's going to continue, and that's why the Russians have got to reach the conclusion that they're the only ones that can end this war, and they've got to do that.
So what's left of Ukraine? I mean, you believe Ukraine is dead. It's done.
I think it is. It's a great tragedy. I don't see how this Ukrainian nation state survives. It was always an artificial construct. You always had too many non-Ukrainians in it, which meant that you had to make a decision. Do we say, all right, you're a citizen of Ukraine, but you can be a Russian. You're a citizen of Ukraine, but you can be a Tartar. You're a citizen of Ukraine, but you can be whatever. As long as you swear allegiance to Ukraine and do business here, we'll work with you. You can have your own language, your own schools, and so forth. That opportunity was lost. That was part of the Minsk Accords. That's what the Russians were asking for. That's gone. So the area that the Russians are sitting on will never be turned back to the Ukrainians. The Russians will never leave that. That's part of Russia. More of Ukraine is going to be swallowed by Russia before this is through. I dare say most of the Ukraine east of the Dnieper River. Well, the Russians also know that Odessa and Kharkov are two Russian-speaking cities. They were never Ukrainian. They were always Russian. I'm sure they're going to insist on those. The real question is, what do you do with the rest of Ukraine, the western part of Ukraine, which really is Ukrainian? Not partially Ukrainian, not Russified or anything else, really is Ukrainian. I don't know. I mean, the Poles all already seem to aspire to acquire it as part of the restoration of the great Polish-Lithuanian Empire. I don't know. I mean, there are all sorts of crazy ideas and views in play right now. None of this has anything to do with us, Clayton.
Right.
Nothing.
Right.
And that's why American soldiers are not going there to fight.
Joe Biden claims to support American manufacturing, but in reality, he's pushing the same pro-China globalist agenda that ripped the industrial heart out of our country. It ripped us apart. Biden and the globalists support raising taxes on American production. They support more crippling regulations killing American jobs. They support skyrocketing domestic energy costs. And they support massive anti-American multinational agreements that send our wealth and factories overseas. Very simply, the Biden agenda taxes America to build up China. China is the big beneficiary. We cannot let that happen. And just a couple of years ago, it wasn't happening. China paid to the United States hundreds of billions of dollars, and no other president got 10 cents, legitimately 10 cents from China. My agenda will tax China to build up America. The heart of my vision is a sweeping pro-American overhaul of our tax and trade policy to move from the Biden system that punishes domestic producers and rewards outsourcers to a system that rewards domestic production and taxes foreign companies and those who export American jobs. They will be rewarded and rewarded.
Vamos. So Brazil's new puppet of the World Health Organization is a guy by the name of President Lula da Silva. Of course, he is a huge supporter of the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum. He made a big announcement this week, and we wanted to unpack what he had to say about government vaccines and social services and how this could... by the way, this is what the World Health Organization wants. They want this big push by their governments in order for people to get vaccines at all levels.
What they did not want was Jair Bolsonaro, who said, we are going to maintain autonomy. We will not join the World Health Organization. We will not push COVIDism on our people. So he had to get out of there.
Yeah, they had to get rid of him. So they did a good job of that. So now Lula da Silva announced on Tuesday that the COVID-19 shot will be mandatory for children if parents wish to continue receiving government assistance.
That's so evil.
Does it sound like Canada? Does it sound like other countries coming to a theater near you? I mean, this is the kind of stuff that has a contagion about it. So Lula made this declaration during the inauguration of the ophthalmology and diagnostic units of the Super Caracoca Health Center in Benfica, Rio de Janeiro. He said the Bolsa Familia is coming back, and it's coming back with something important. It's coming back, he says, with conditions. The children have to be in school. If they're not in school, the mother loses the benefits, Lula said about this social welfare program. It says the children...
Which in and of itself is a bit tone deaf because, you know, there are a lot of families that live in a lot of rural areas that maybe are starving and can't necessarily get their children. Like, he has a lot of people living in poverty and lacking a lot of infrastructure. If you read... Michael Schellenberger's book about how he lived on these remote farms in these really complicated, hard lives in Brazil in the rainforest. Like, it's not as simple as that. So I'd like to see some solutions about how to help starving poor people instead of just conditions.
Right. So you can't get your child to school, then we're also going to take away your money.
Right.
So we're going to take away the money.
Because if you can't get your child to school, you're probably already hurting so much. Yeah, sanctions to the individual. There's a reason for that. It's not because you're a lazy sack.
Right, exactly. So the children have to be in school, he says. If they're not in school, the mother loses the benefits. The children will have to be vaccinated, he says. Suppose they don't have a vaccination certificate. In that case, the mother will lose the benefit, he says. Lula says the government vaccine mandate is for the greater good, even if it means citizens take 10 or 50 vaccines. He literally says this. Watch.
Olha, a gente só tem que lamentar, sabe, o que aconteceu nesse país, lamentar pelas vítimas e fazer convite a vocês. Pelo amor de Deus, a gente não pode ser ignorante a ponto de achar que não vale a pena tomar vacina. Uma mãe que não leva o seu filho para tomar vacina contra a paralisia infantil. Uma mãe que não leva o seu filho para tomar vacina contra o sarampo, contra a rubéola, contra qualquer outra coisa. Eu fico me perguntando que tipo de amor que essa mãe tem pelo seu filho, que ela não cuida do filho no momento mais importante que essa criança pode ser vacinada e pode evitar ter uma doença mais delicada na vida dela. Agora vai começar a campanha do Zé Gotinha. Sabe? Agora vai começar, gente... A gente não pode vacilar, a gente não pode brincar. É uma questão da ciência. Eu, se tiver 10 vacinas da Covid e 50 para tomar, eu tomo tantas quanto for necessária, porque eu gosto da minha vida. E eu acho que cada um tem que gostar da vida dos seus filhos, levar as crianças na idade certa. É por isso, Nízia, que o Bolsa Família está voltando, e o Bolsa Família volta com uma coisa importante. Porque o Bolsa Família volta com condicionantes. Qual é a condicionante? Primeiro, as crianças que vão receber, as crianças até 6 anos de idade vão receber R$150 a mais. Segundo, as crianças têm que estar na escola. Se não estiver na escola, a mãe perde o auxílio. Terceiro, as crianças têm que ser vacinadas. Se não tiver atestado de vacina, a mãe também perde o benefício. Quarto.
Yeah, let's applaud that. Let's applaud. Right. Mother's going to lose her benefits. Yeah, give it up for that. And no vaccine and vaccine mandates. Yeah, let's.
And it is for the greater good. They just don't tell you that's for the greater good of Pfizer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And the subtitles were a little off there. So it's like, they were not spot on. But we got they were mostly
the Polish ones were a tiny bit off too. It's a program we use that needs to.
Well, they do their best, I guess.
They do their best.
Meanwhile, Lula flew to Washington D.C. on Friday to meet with a fellow World Economic Forum lover, President Biden.
Bedfellows, you may say.
For this bilateral meeting.
Can I interject before we move on? Because it's a question pertinent to what we just saw really quick. Is it still the Pfizer mRNA vaccines he's talking about, or do they have different vaccines down there?
Well, he also was talking about...
Because he said, measles or...
He was talking about
something.
measles as well. He was talking about the entire vaccination program, but then he later goes on to say... I'll take as many COVID vaccines as they want me to. If they say 10, I'll take 10. If they say 50, I'll take 50.
But is it the Pfizer mRNAs, or do they have like an actual vaccine down there versus what we have here, which are not vaccines?
I'm not sure what they use in Brazil.
Yeah, I'm not sure specifically what it is. If anyone's watching us from Brazil, let us know. So anyway, meanwhile, Lula flew to Washington, D.C. on Friday to meet with President Biden, who, of course, is a fellow World Economic Forum, World Health Organization puppet to implement anything that they want for this bilateral meeting. And they were basically kissing each other. And this really weird moment with, I'll show you more of this, but here's President Biden and Lula meeting. And then I don't know what the hell President Biden is even doing in this. Watch. Can I hold your hand too? I like just holding random women. So I don't know what they're doing around with this. And again, they're sort of ignoring all of the mountains of evidence around this mRNA injection for children. I mean, how ineffective it is for children, why there's not even a need for it for children. Totally ignoring it. That this is for the best, he said, to live your best life.
Well, not in England. Now, in England today, they announced that people under 50 can no longer get boosted. They will no longer be giving boosters.
Can they share that with Brazil?
Yeah. Which is crazy, right? To think like how hard they jocked these, and now they're like, actually.
Yeah, we're not going to allow it for children.
Yeah.
I mean, we know that the text messages were being sent around like crazy, like, it's ready for your children, go and get it. CNN anchors were talking about it, how excited they were. Go take them right now. Oh, I'm so excited about this. Go give them to your children.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. So that's Brazil. We hope that things maybe take a turn on this. I don't know. And right now, they're going to continue to give these to children. And we see, especially in young boys, that's the most troubling thing about this, like what this could do to young boys. And we still don't have all the data on that. But the data that we do have is troubling enough. And they, in a nation that populous, they should be taking this really seriously.
And in a situation like in Brazil, we won't know any of the problems that occur with like the vaccines, because the children will die of starvation because their benefits are being removed because so it's just like they kind of have a win-win here. Like you can't get the data because the people are dead.
Right.
I mean, it's ridiculous.
That is crazy.
Which is, of course, U.S. sovereignty being handed over to the World Health Organization. And this happens in about 4 days, right? February 27th.
Right. So over the next few days, the World Health Organization and member states are going to work out the details of this intergovernmental negotiating body meeting that happens on February 27th. And what they're trying to do is hand over power to the World Health Organization to dictate policies for future pandemics. The Biden administration last fall released a statement with the WHO saying, we see the need for this. We like it. We think it's important. We're going to do this. We're all in. This is called the WHO CA+, so that's how I'm going to refer to it. All 194 WHO member states are going to allow the WHO the power to declare and manage global pandemic emergencies. That means they could mandate lockdowns. They could mandate vaccines. They could dictate vaccine supplies and distribution. And they can monitor and put in place surveillance of entire populations. I'm going to show you the language because I went through the CA Plus today that hands this to them. Here is what the draft of this treaty, because it's only in draft form right now. Here's what it says. Here's the vision, is that it aims for a world where pandemics are effectively controlled to protect present and future generations from pandemics and their devastating consequences, and to advance the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health for all peoples based on the basis of equity, human rights, and solidarity, with a view to achieving universal health coverage while recognizing the sovereign rights of countries, acknowledging the difference in levels of development among countries respecting their national context, and recognizing relevant international instruments. So, okay, that sounds kind of nice, but it's predicated on the idea.
Wait, what part sounds nice?
I mean, the idea of like we all get equal access to medicines that we need.
So like, okay, sub-Saharan Africa that gets screwed, and wealthy countries get the medications, or they charge insane prices, or
well,
that
we
sort of.
saw this
right.
happen during the monkeypox outbreak because Africa's been suffering from monkeypox for decades now, and did not have access to vaccines. But as soon as Western countries have it, hey, here's some vaccines we can use. We've had it in our stockpiles.
And the WHO really already had that power during this last pandemic, because they were the ones censoring. If you had any kind of notice on the bottom of your video, it was going by WHO guidelines. And so they were demonizing drugs already that were alternatives to what's on the market. So it's already happening. They're just going to make it more official now, it sounds.
Right. Yeah, right. They would shoot down things that were more natural curatives, etc., in favor of biopharmaceuticals that would make billions of dollars.
Yes, and the idea.
Not to mention.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Not to mention that like if they go with the whole international lockdown routine again, how does that work for distributing then across borders? If it's all then going to be global, are they going to just have to build like in all 194 states like the manufacturing for any kind of medication or anything that they would need? Because you can't lock down the borders and restrict international travel and then freely distribute what's needed to 194 countries. It seems like
they do address that, but it's not. It's light on the biopharmaceutical collaboration, because they say, we're going to talk about it in a bit, but it's like they encourage pharmaceuticals to work together and share technology so that each member state could make their own vaccines. But it's very loosely enforced in this language, unlike the surveillance language, which is not quite so loose. That's a really good question. Also, I just want to touch on the fact that the World Health Organization is saying, well, some countries did good and some countries didn't. And we don't have data to support this, that anybody sort of followed the WHO to a point and did better than anybody else. I think right now, disagree with me if you'd like, right now it sort of feels like everyone came out of the pandemic the same, whether there was strict or not strict lockdowns. Like no one country was able to like do better through government policy.
In what way, though? In what way?
Outcomes of the pandemic. Like, it does
schools,
feel like...
well, we don't know yet fully, right? And I guess we won't know for a few years, but like kids not being locked down at home and education being damaged, where they're set back a year or 2 years.
But I'm talking about just like getting through it, because we're now seeing that a lot of the deaths that we were told were COVID deaths were deaths with COVID. Fewer are being attributed to COVID. It seems like no actual government policy got one country through it better than another.
I think Switzerland did, or whatever, because like if you're saying they didn't listen to government, U.S. government policy versus their own, because they didn't do all the things we did here, and they got through it much better than we did.
Yes.
And I believe that was government.
Yes.
Yeah, let us know in the chat what you guys think. Let us know. Did any one country come out of this smelling like total roses? I mean, we use Sweden as an example, and some people say, like Brazil's still going through that. Well, they're still going through it for mandates issues and other things, of course. And now China, that would fully lock down the no COVID policy. Then suddenly everyone got COVID last week or over the past few weeks. Like everyone got it, right? So that was not the solution. That was the awful solution.
And so the WHO is making the point that because everyone handled it differently, we need to make sure everyone handles it the same, even though it would seem to me that the data plays out that everyone handled it this differently and then ended up sort of like getting through it with a similar outcome. Like we all just had to survive it, just get through it, I guess. Is maybe survive is the wrong choice of words. But anyway, I don't think I can agree with the premise that the WHO, had all the right policies, and it's just that we had a bunch of countries acting as bad children who didn't.
Like we and we should really point out who funds the World Health Organization, right? At the heart of this, the number one funder of the World Health Organization is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Number one, as Whitney Webb on our show has articulately laid out, right? So the amount of money that comes from a group that is intimately tied to the biopharmaceutical complex, making money off of this, and then has written books and laid out plans about how the next pandemic will unfold, is behind the World Health Organization.
Right.
At the heart of all of this.
Yeah. And I think the point I think history will eventually show that the countries with the fewest WHO related restrictions are the ones that may have done the best. That does seem, and so what they're saying here is we need more universal policy, when it doesn't seem that policy actually got anyone through the pandemic, is the point that I'm trying to make.
Right.
I don't think that the WHO really has a strong leg to stand on right now, because the things that they were saying ended up not being all that reliable as we went, when we rewind the tape.
Right. So let me just say now, to put a tighter point on that, we are now ceding control of our response to a next round of any kind of pandemic,
to an organization that doesn't have a good track record from the last one,
and who is not elected, is an unelected group of people that we are ceding power to. Like, I just want to really drive home this point, because I don't think people are understanding this. And certainly when they see this is not being covered, I did a search, this is not being covered in the mainstream media at all in this way, and it's almost being played up by like the Atlantic and other news organizations I was reading today as a really good thing. This is a really good thing that we're ceding our power to the World Health Organization.
Right. I'm going to go through the CA+, and I'm just going to give you the worst case scenario of the things that the WHO is giving themselves power with this document. And I made a list as I went through it. One, they want to give themselves power to define the next pandemic. So what is it? What's the sickness? What's the lockdown? Or, what is it that we're running from? To determine lockdowns, give themselves surveillance power, determine treatments, vaccine mandates, vaccine distribution, vaccine IP and profits, and redistribution of pretty much everything. I'm going to show you. There's a sort of part in here that I'm like, whoa! Like, they think they can literally change use of land because of pandemic prevention.
This is again the eminent domain clause that we've been talking about. We've covered this over the past few months, and this was one of the biggest things that stood out. Most people weren't covering this, is that they have the right to seize land. They have the right to seize property.
And we're going to show you the language that they give themselves this power. So because this is a draft, the WHO hasn't even defined certain powers or problems. See this working document? This is like, you know, they were able to define what a pandemic is and what populations are, but these things are like holding pattern. Okay, pathogen with pandemic potential means they don't even know what that means yet, what it means to have a potential. These things I do not like. The things in red are the things that give me stomach ache. For instance, the World One Health surveillance means they don't know yet, but they're going to get to it, meaning everybody surveyed, but we'll define that later. Interpandemic, I don't know what that is, like a pandemic within a pandemic. It's a meta pandemic. Finally, the one I like the least here is infodemic. Like, okay, we know how the
misinformation attack on,
Yes, right? So they do know how they define a pandemic. Here's the definition of pandemic. It's like a pathogen that infects human populations. But information, an info pandemic, is an idea linked to severe morbidity and high mortality, maybe? So will they want to link thoughts and ideas and speech to human mortality and control that too? You can imagine. I hate that. Yeah. And every solution.
Every solution is an inoculation.
Right.
Whether it's inoculation of information, an inoculation of a vaccine.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you know, there's long history in this too. I'm just, reading a book right now just on a subset of Nazi Germany, and this was exactly part of it. You know, understanding and controlling every drop of information along the way, and they absolutely knew that the slightest crack in that could lead to all sorts of problems for them. So yes, absolutely controlling the narrative.
Yeah. This document does.
Something that.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. This is something that I kind of agree, and maybe this is not the right time in the conversation to have this, but I kind of agree with something that Elon Musk had said recently with the danger of this, and I can see that the danger of this. Whereas if you have 194 governments running their if we're in a global pandemic and they're each running their own thing, and a couple of those governments fail at what they're trying to do, the majority of them still survive. If you have one shot and you don't have any overage. So if they screw up the rollout of their pandemic plans, that's global.
Yeah.
They screw it up for everybody.
Right.
And then
it turns something which could be contained into like a extinction event.
Right. And then
I don't like that word.
Well, and then what are the consequences for this unelected group of globalists? Is there like a high court that can try them?
Well, they do talk about how if two nation states have a dispute, how they work out that litigation and what domain. And they talk about these elected bodies. There must be like 2 presidents from each country that are serving on the board, and that there will be a auditor at the end of every, but none of them are elected by us. They're only internally elected by WHO and member states. So let's get back to the document and the things that should be, concerning us. It does say that states maintain sovereignty for pandemic preparedness, but not during actual pandemics. It also says that states that join this are bound by their obligations to this document. Take a look here, which defers a central role to the WHO. Basically, it's our way or the highway. Now, it does not discourage private companies from profiting from a vaccine a la Pfizer, Moderna, but it does say that they should share technology, so they're not the only ones who know how to make a vaccine that gets us out of the pandemic. But it's very loose on that language, which makes me think that biopharmaceuticals are like, well, yeah, we'll pay lip service to that, but we're not actually going to do it when it comes time to profit from vaccines. It's very heavy with the word encourage. Take a look here. Like, they will encourage patent holders to, waive their royalties or share their patents. We encourage this.
Right.
We encourage big pharma to coordinate, but they don't have to. According to this document, they absolutely still are free to profit. So when and if that happens, it's okay. We sort of got around it with this fast and loose language.
Well, we saw this in the last pandemic, right? So we have a track record, we have a history here. These companies are not going to do that.
No.
They're absolutely going to not, even being encouraged to share is still not going to happen.
Now, it does address strengthening healthcare workforce to make sure that they could handle another pandemic, but they're very interested in gender disparity because they point out that women were disproportionately emergency workers and healthcare workers, and they're worried that the workforce we had before was not diverse enough. So as we're preparing for the next pandemic, we're really interested in representation. And it like representation of healthcare workers, that it shows a diverse. Like, is this a problem during a pandemic that like, oh, I just wish I saw more diverse healthcare workers working on me?
No, this is, of course, the priority of the left, right? This is absolutely the priority of the Biden administration, which is this, like, instead of fixing the country, we're more concerned about equity.
Right.
Like, we're more concerned about making sure that we have a cabinet that has a multiplicity of different genders and gender.
Women disproportionately self-select into nursing. Right. Is that a problem?
Right, biologically, we know that women gravitate towards, as Jordan Peterson talks about, like women gravitate towards emotional and to people, right? Men gravitate towards things. That's why there's more men in engineering and women in nursing. It's just biology, right? And so now we should write this into the World Health Organization rules that we can't have women being nurses, but you need equity during a pandemic.
I don't know
we need
exactly
more men
what that's about.
Ridiculous.
Go ahead, David.
Well, and I was just going to point out, like, we've already seen what can happen with this. There was a woman who had a traumatic experience with a man, and she did not want a biological man working on her in the hospital, and they put a trans nurse with her, and she did not like that, so they made her leave the hospital, the patient.
Yeah.
So that's where this can go.
Yes.
And it will.
Yeah, and so we need more, but I don't know, a trans woman does not want to represent male enrollment in the nursing industry. They want to represent female enrollment, so that's confusing. I'm just not clear where the problem is here. I mean, I do understand that women were disproportionately affected as first-line workers, but they had self-selected into this industry. I don't think that in itself is a problem. So, you know, I'm free to, I open myself up to being challenged about this. Okay, now about misinformation and infodemics, a new word that I just hate. I hate it, infodemics, but we know it now. We can at least look out for it and reject it. The World Health Organization says they want to conduct social listening campaigns. Could that be another word for surveillance?
Yes.
They want to figure out what your health literacy is. They want to make sure you have better health literacy. That's what they call it. And then they will do so by tackling false, misleading misinformation and disinformation, including through promotion of international cooperation. And so, you know, they're going to just try and teach you to be a better consumer of health news, raise your IQ about medicine, if you will. And then again, this regular social listening and analysis, could that be code for surveillance?
Yes.
In which case, everything becomes surveillance. Because right now, our Constitution protects us. Although, as Edward Snowden points out, you know, the government gives itself powers to collect information that they think is necessary based on certain reinterpretation of laws or certain power grabs or what have you. So this could supersede the U.S. right to privacy if we think, I need to know how you think at all times in case you are capable of launching an infodemic that causes other people to say, take this thing or feel this way, or like, what if you said that you were super into nude yoga is the way to survive the next pandemic, and that's so dangerous that then, you know, they need to, I mean, you can see how that's the stupidest example I could think of,
right?
Because it's relevant.
I think nude yoga is a curative, so
it may very well be, or you could break an arm, because that sounds slippery.
That's what they were doing at Epstein Island. The problem I have is not just that they're surveilling, is that this is outside, and this is outside of the U.S. government court system. Like, this is now ceding control to an organization that will, I mean, if someone if someone does share this information and they are feeling like their rights are infringed, where do they go? Because it's not going to be upheld in the courts. It's not going to be upheld in the United States court system.
Right.
Who are you filing this against?
Yeah.
You've literally ceded control, and now we're in a, quote, emergency situation. According to whom? Well, according to the WHO that we've now ceded our power to. So the U.S. Supreme Court here, and this is the point that Catherine Austin Fitts makes about this, is that now the U.S. court system is out of the picture.
Yes.
Right? So you don't have any power. And the point of this is, and this is again why Africa stood up to this when they were voting on this at the end of the summer and these draft proposals, and Africa said no way, and the world stood up and applauded African countries for putting their foot down, because they saw that they didn't want to be ceding any more control to these Western elites. And that's really what it is. It's almost like colonialists in a way, right? So they're ceding this power to these Western elites once again, giving away their sovereignty. And they said, in Africa, and countries said, we don't want to do that anymore. With hundreds of years of you doing this to us, we're not doing it anymore.
Because if an infodemic is at stake, then all wrongthink becomes a reason to survey, a reason to deplatform, a reason to what?
Right.
Right?
We've already
Accuse you of a crime for wrongthink?
Well, we've already, and David brought it up earlier, like, we've been deplatformed on YouTube multiple times, 4 times to be exact, banned and blocked for things that we were literally, that was coming out from science, from doctors, the medical professionals, and not only that, reading from Pfizer's own classified documents that ended up coming out. And yet, because the WHO, the World Health Organization, had certain guidelines in place, YouTube ceded its own power to the WHO, and therefore, in their own terms of service, Google's own terms of service, they would ban you and block you based on what the WHO said. So they were already ceding power, and then they can basically defer to it and say, no, we go with what the WHO says.
Yeah.
Well, and beyond that, we saw even the newsletter. So in your email, our newsletter has been called dangerous. So it's like the platforms, your email, like this is expanding everywhere.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Philip.
Yeah, so in that though, like that last image we had up there, we're talking about like the social listening and the increasing your health, like the public health literacy. Like I see that very much as all of these countries signing on to give up science to just one, like basically what the WHO wants.
Yeah.
So I would see this as it's not just them like saying what information is or is not out there, but actually preventing people from studying things they don't want. And if we relinquish control over science and scientific data gathering, then they can basically just feed us anything they want, and we have no alternative. We have nothing to say about it.
Yeah.
Just giving them control of the science.
Would not have this right to take it to whatever international court. According to this document, if we were being surveyed, if we were being silenced, if we were being accused of spreading infodemics, I really don't know what our recourse would be. Now, about this redistribution of everything concern, here's where I got that. Again, this is from the CA+. This clause says that the parties in CA+ will identify and integrate into relevant pandemic prevention and preparedness plans interventions that address the drivers of the emergence and reemergence of disease at the human-animal environment interface, including but not limited to climate change, land use change, wildlife trade, desertification, and antimicrobial resistance. So, land use change is a concerning, like they can decide.
Animal environment interface. I mean, this is exactly what's been happening in the Netherlands.
So they can say like, oh, for instance, bats can't find enough water to drink because of drought, because of climate change.
Right.
And so then they're bringing viruses into human populations. And so we need to change completely the way we farm or what have you.
Right. Or because of nitrogen levels, we want to make sure that people are kept inside of a city in 15-minute cities. We don't want people driving because of the concerns about expansion of this virus in some capacity. We want to keep you here in this place locked down. down. We don't want you driving anywhere. We're taking your farms away. This is exactly what's been happening. It's been happening in New Zealand. It's been happening in the United States. It's been happening in the Netherlands. It's been happening around the world. So this is not
only going to truck in approved food.
Yeah, I mean, this is not a conspiracy theorist, and I see a lot of conspiracy theory. I see a lot of people in the chat saying, guys, wake up, this is not a conspiracy theory. And people in the chat are saying this. This is happening right now. 4 days they vote on this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, a lot of it I have sort of, like, oh, that can't be. No, that's probably not the case. And then I read this document and I'm like, WTF, it's real. This is real. What they actually are writing out.
It's in the document. These guys got together. I mean, oh, come on.
And when everybody signs in on it, when everybody signs off on this, this gives them what they have wanted basically forever. It gives the power on a global scale to a few elite people, like we like to say, unelected people. It gives them the power to seize land, to force whatever change they want. They can do it all under the guise of this WHO document. They're like, no, everybody signed on this, so we can seize your land. We can call herds. We can basically prevent people from hunting, prevent people from growing their own food, prevent people from collecting their own rainwater, like all down the list. And so that everything is now mandated that it has to come from this handful of people who are unelected, who now seize control of everything. They've just been waiting.
And one thing you didn't even mention, Philip, was the money supply. And this is why they don't want you to have cash, right? They want you to move away from, they don't want you to have gold. They don't want you to have silver. They don't want you to have cash. They want you to move towards a digital currency that they control everything, which is all fake. It's artificial to begin with. They don't want you to go into bank tellers. Banks now reward you for staying home and staying away from the bank, right? You get extra, you save money on your checking account if you do not go to the bank, right? They don't want you to be involved in your own money. They want a digital supply.
I mean, but you talk about land use, right? Or right to access land. Think about vaccine mandates, right? So many people were able to get exemptions for their vaccine mandates or what have you. You won't have that option. They're just going to come to you, stick you with something.
Yeah.
And, or else you don't access any land except maybe your own bedroom or
and
what
money.
have you.
And money.
Right.
Oh, we have your vaccine passport. You didn't get your vaccine, your WHO approved vaccine. Therefore, we're not giving you your money.
Yeah.
We're not giving you your stipend. You don't have access to money.
Think about how far back they started the Real ID system, right? And I don't remember where I was, but I was at FedEx to ship a package. They grabbed my license and they scanned the back of my license at FedEx and got all my information. I was like, I didn't realize that was a thing, but now with this Real ID, it's going to be your passport will be tied to it. Your money's going to be tied to it.
Yeah.
All of this stuff is going to be tied to it. And all I can say is, I think we all owe Alex Jones an apology.
Yeah, who was absolutely right about it. And when they scanned your thing, they knew what you were sending. They knew what you were sending, scanning. Like, here's this, David's sending packages here, this and that. They can control everything.
So the question remains, does Biden even have the power to do this? Recall that President Trump withdrew from the World Health Organization, and President Biden signed us right back up as soon as he got into office. So could a future president then withdraw from the CA+? They could, but the CA+ is binding for 2 years at a time. But doesn't Biden need congressional approval to give this kind of power to an outside body? There is precedence that says that he could make an executive decision to sign us up for this.
Well, the executive branch,
all of us?
Yeah, the executive branch is one of the few, let's be clear. The United States presidency, historically, under the Constitution, is pretty weak. It's a pretty weak office, actually. However, one area it's in strength is in treaties. Right? The executive branch and the president of the United States has the power of the treaty. And so this is seen as like a pandemic treaty, right? So this gives the president power. And this is the brilliance of this document, is that it falls under that umbrella.
Yeah.
And therefore, Congress be damned. And we also see that the expansion of the executive branch anyway over the past number of years, he can just go to war without Congress anyway. I mean, look what we're doing with, in Ukraine and every other war we're currently in, never got any congressional approval.
Now, you can see how a lot of these policies that are supposed to be handled at the state level would be challenging this, governors or attorneys general, but there's no guarantee that the Supreme Court takes up any of their cases. So it's, I mean, if I were a betting woman and I put the odds of the United States actually joining this treaty, I'm going to say 75%.
Yeah, I'm going to go with 100% because Biden's like, oh, it's all ready to go. So we're signing it on the 27th of February. We're ready to go. So
boys, do you want to ring in?
I'll say 100%.
Take your.
Yeah, no, I'm with you because it's like.
Go ahead, David.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that delay. So I think it's because we've seen what they do on war. They're always, against these little things on the fringes. But when it comes to things like this, they all jump in lockstep.
So you, give me a number.
For that control.
A number.
I'm 100%. I'm with Clayton.
Okay. Philip?
I'd say, with David's point, that's exactly the point I was going to make. Like, this is one of those ideas where you have like a handful of people at the top making the decision for the majority of people at the bottom, from their perspective, and we won't really have a say in it because we don't. So I would say that if you look at any country, I would imagine that around 70 to 75% probably of the people of that country would disagree with this decision, and it's just that upper echelon that's making the decision for them.
All right. I'm just holding out because I'm an optimist. I don't want to.
So you said 75%.
I say 75% chance it happens.
All right. Well,
that's pretty significant.
See this contingency of people who are like gaming the world. Like, what part of the world can I live in where I feel like my kids aren't going to be conscripted into war and I won't have to have vaccine mandates and I'm not going to be beholden to this. And maybe now we'll see African passports start to gain favor and as the next passport that's like a passport of freedom. Who knows, right? The countries that are holdouts, where once maybe Brazil, now that president's gone, the president who is in office now likes the idea of this. So we'll see.
Yeah, and Bolsonaro said he's going back to Brazil to be the opposition, and Lula da Silva said, hey, we're going all back in on the WHO. So where you thought Brazil was holdout, not anymore.
He says all of it. What about the resurrection? He says that our people are dead. Negroes are dead. Walking zombies. You're the one that the book is talking about who is dead. Dead to the knowledge of yourself. Dead to the knowledge of your own people. Dead to the knowledge of your own God. Dead to the knowledge of the devil. You don't even know who the devil is. The one down inside the ground that's going to burn you after you're dead. Why the devil is right here on self this earth. We believe in the resurrection of the dead. We believe that the 20 million black people in America in the last days will be taught the truth. The trumpet of truth will sound in your ear. As it's being sounded today, the trumpet of truth. And this truth strikes your ear and strikes your heart. It'll open your eyes. It'll open your ears. It'll make you stand up. It'll do the same thing for you that truth did for the dry bones in the valley. Because the picture of dry bones in the valley is talking about you. The picture of Lazarus laying dead 4 days is talking about you. You are Lazarus. You are the dry bones. You are the prodigal son. You are the lost sheep. You are the people about whom the Bible is speaking, who will stand up in the last day when the trumpet is sounded. Black people are waking up. Black people are standing up. Black people are rising up. We believe we are the people of God's choice. That's what we believe. We believe we're the chosen people. We don't believe Jews are the chosen people. We don't believe Jews are the ones going to the promised land. We don't think Jews are a part of God. No, they didn't even come out of the Holy Land. They come out of the caves of Europe. We believe we are the people of God's choice. As it is written that God would choose the rejected and despised. And we can find no other person fitting this description in these last days more than the so-called Negroes in America.